Billionaire CEO Jeff Bezos is running for his life, arms and legs pumping as fast as they will go. Behind him, he can hear the mob advancing, closing in. He has to lose them, has to find a way to throw them off the trail. Up ahead, an opportunity presents itself, a narrow alleyway. He ducks down the alley, heart pounding in his chest, as he listens to the footsteps of his pursuers sprint past him. They're gone. He's safe. For now. He takes a moment to catch his breath, vision swimming from the panic and exhaustion, and suddenly catches a metallic glint out of the corner of his eye. Uh-oh. He's not as alone as he thought he was. He straightens and prepares to defend himself from the strange, wild-eyed man at the other side of the alley. The man who is slowly advancing toward him, holding a knife and a fork. When it comes to the lifestyles of the ultra-wealthy, many of us struggle to wrap our minds around what they might get up to during the day. Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos. What do these famous billionaires do with their time? Profiles of the industry giants paint a picture of early morning and green juice, of long meetings and business trips to exotic locales. For Jeff Bezos, that's a pretty accurate picture, or at least it used to be. On one fateful day, the Amazon CEO found his extraordinarily ordinary routine turned completely upside down. In a series of bizarre, terrifying events, the dream life of a tech billionaire became a nightmare. The day started like pretty much any other. Jeff climbed out of bed at 6:30 a.m., honoring his personal motto of early to bed, early to rise. This left him with the morning to himself so he could take his time settling into the day. He brewed a pot of coffee and read the newspaper for a while. When the kids woke up, he whipped up a batch of pancakes for them. Then, at 10 a.m., it was time to leave the kids with the nanny and head off to work. First, a meeting with the shareholders. Then, a lunch meeting with the head of a company he was considering purchasing. Then, it was time to drop in on an Amazon fulfillment center for a surprise visit. After all, who doesn't love unexpectedly seeing their boss's boss's boss in the middle of a busy workday? When he arrived, Jeff greeted everyone and then took the operations manager aside for a one-on-one meeting. He wanted to check in about productivity and all the usual things. Were employees taking too many bathroom breaks? How quickly could they move packages? Just standard questions. But as he talked, he couldn't help but notice his employee's eyes glazing over a bit. He asked the man if he was feeling all right, but the manager assured Jeff that he was just hungry. It was almost his lunch break, and he was looking forward to the leftover meatloaf waiting for him. Well, Jeff wanted the man to be focused during their meeting, so he offered to go ahead and start the lunch break now. After all, the ideal lunch break is one that you're also working during. They sat down in the break room together, and Jeff could hear the man's stomach growling. He wasn't kidding about being hungry. But the cold meatloaf would surely sate his hunger and get the conversation back on track. The man picked at his meatloaf while Jeff continued speaking, delivering an inspirational speech on improving metrics and worker efficiency. As he became more passionate, as he often did when talking about efficiency, he began to gesticulate more dramatically. As he became lost in his own brilliant words and corporate wisdom, he didn't notice the operations manager abandoning the meatloaf entirely, staring instead at Jeff's hand, which was drifting closer and closer to his face. Jeff was just about to reach the conclusion of his point and send the employee on his merry way when the operations manager all of a sudden snatched Jeff's hand out of the air, pulled it in close, and bit down hard. Jeff yanked his hand from the other man's grasp, crying out in pain and shock. He'd had employees respond poorly to feedback before, but never like this. Usually they just cried or threatened to quit. No one had ever bitten him before. He demanded an explanation for this behavior, which was certainly not appropriate for the workplace. The operations manager blinked, brow furrowed in confusion. He couldn't articulate why he had done it, what had possessed him to grab the CEO's hand and attempt to chow down. He offered up the only explanation he could. He was hungry, and Jeff looked delicious. The words sent a chill down the billionaire's spine. He stood up and excused himself from the meeting. He left the fulfillment center and left work for the day. In fact, he left town altogether. This was all too much, and he needed a vacation. He called the nanny to let her know he wouldn't be coming home for a little while. No need for him to pack a bag. Anything he needed he could purchase when he arrived at whatever luxury hotel he settled on. He called up his favorite pilot, told him to pick a destination with an exclusive, private resort, something with a spa so he could relax, and within the hour, he was sitting on his private jet preparing for takeoff. When the jet reached cruising altitude, one of the usual flight attendants came to his seat, pouring him a glass of red wine, one of the nicer bottles on board, as she could tell he was having a difficult day. She also offered a variety of snacks. This was no commercial airline with its peanuts and pretzels. This was a luxury craft with luxury snacks. Crostini with French butter and freshly shaved truffles, a charcuterie board with the finest meats and cheeses, fresh fruit, and chilled oysters were all on the menu. Jeff treated himself to a little nibble or two, finished his wine, and kicked back for a nap. He awoke sometime later, not to the comforting feeling of the jet's smooth landing, but to an odd, greasy sensation on his arm. He opened his eyes to find the same flight attendant spreading some of that French butter onto his forearm before shaving some of the black truffle onto the skin. All the while, she was licking her lips, a ravenous look in her eye, like someone about to cut into a beautiful cut of Kobe beef. Jeff shook her off of him, shouting at her to stop. Thankfully, the plane touched down before she could try anything else, and he disembarked as quickly as possible, grabbing a hot towel on the way out to wipe the butter from his arm. Was everyone losing their minds today? Good thing he was somewhere he could relax and forget about his troubles for a little while. He had been to this particular resort and spa before, whenever he needed a bit of a physical and emotional tune-up. He accepted his complimentary glass of champagne from the check-in desk, and after reserving the finest suite available, he headed down to the spa to start putting the chaos and oddities of the day behind him. It was impossible to be stressed out in a place like this, with the soothing music, the aromatherapeutic scents pumped into the room, and of course, the spa's patented herbally infused hot springs. Naturally occurring hot springs water was pumped into private baths and filled with a variety of herbs with calming properties, including sage and rosemary. The attendant handed Jeff a towel and a fluffy white robe for after his soak, and with a sigh of relief, he settled into the steaming, herbaceous water. He didn't notice that the attendant hadn't left the room yet. He was too busy relaxing, closing his eyes, and letting his troubles drift away. He stretched out his legs, feeling the muscles uncoil and release their tension, feeling the bits of fresh herbs in the bath tickle his skin. He took a deep breath, savoring the fresh scent of the sage, the rosemary, the garlic? Well, garlic did have some anti-inflammatory properties. Perhaps this was a new part of the treatment. He settled back into the experience again, trying to clear his mind, but as he struggled to maintain his relaxation, he became distinctly aware that the soak was becoming, well, he could only describe it as chunky. He opened his eyes and discovered that, in addition to the herbs and garlic, there were now slices of onion floating through the water, along with chunks of carrot and potato. There, at the other side of the large tub, the attendant was sprinkling salt and pepper into the water. This wasn't a soak at all. It was soup. It was Jeff Bezos' soup. The attendant was just dipping a spoon into the water to taste the broth when Jeff pulled him into the water, using the sudden distraction to make a run for it. He didn't have time to grab the robe, just throwing the towel around his waist and getting out of there as quickly as possible. He tore through the spa, ignoring the signs that urged guests not to run in the area. There was no time to play by the rules. But he didn't consider why those rules might be in place. Not until his feet slipped on the wet, slick floor and he crashed to the ground. His head hit the tile and everything went dark. When Jeff opened his eyes again, he was sitting in a doctor's office, wearing a hospital gown. A doctor was taking his vitals and greeted him when he saw the CEO regaining consciousness. He had, she explained, sustained a mild concussion when he hit his head in the spa. The hotel staff had brought him into a nearby urgent care facility, unsure of what else to do. Luckily, his injuries weren't too bad. He would experience a bit of dizziness, maybe some nausea, but he was going to be just fine. Jeff was inclined to disagree. He didn't think that he would be just fine. He explained to the doctor that something terrible was going on, something that was going to sound crazy. For some reason, everywhere he went today, people were trying to, well, eat him. The doctor looked at him with a knowing smile. She understood, she told him. He was under so much pressure all the time. It couldn't be easy, being one of the richest men in the world, the head of one of the largest companies out there. The stress was getting to him. It made sense. But there was no way that people were really trying to eat him. That was absurd. She offered to give him a sedative, something to take the edge off and help him to calm down and focus on recovering from his injuries. Reluctantly, he agreed, and she left the room for a moment to prepare the injection. He took a deep breath, struggling to center himself. She was right, of course. There weren't people trying to eat him. When ordinary people said eat the rich, they didn't mean it literally, right? They just meant that he should start paying taxes or something silly like that. They weren't actually trying to cook him and devour his flesh. That would be insane. The doctor came back into the room, and Jeff was just beginning to believe it might be true, that this might all be in his head. But then, he looked at the object in her hand and saw not a syringe, but a turkey baster. No, the doctor was in on it. Was nowhere safe? He barreled out of the office, knocking the doctor to the floor as he went. He needed to get to the authorities. Surely they could help him. He ran to the nearest police station, bursting through the doors and blurting out his story to the first officer he saw. There was only one problem. They didn't know who he was. All the police officers saw was a barefoot man in a hospital gown with no identification on him, claiming that he was CEO Jeff Bezos, and a bunch of different people were trying to eat him. They laughed him out of the station, but not before threatening to place him into an involuntary hold at a psych hospital. Jeff couldn't let that happen. Locked up somewhere with no way out? That would be the perfect place for someone to corner him, to capture him, and cook him up for dinner. No, he couldn't let that happen. He fled the police station and found himself wandering the streets, unsure of what to do, where to go. He had nothing with him. No money, no phone, no hope. None of his usual staff were there. He couldn't call a car, couldn't pay for a taxi, and most importantly, he couldn't trust anyone. As Jeff walked down the street, muttering to himself and struggling to come up with a plan of action, he began to notice that he was drawing a bit of a crowd. It made sense. He certainly was a bizarre sight. A nearly naked man talking to himself in the middle of the street. But the crowd had a look in their eyes that Jeff didn't like. They were licking their lips, rubbing their stomachs. Some of them drooled. They talked amongst themselves, first in hushed tones, but then louder, bolder, as they shared their homicidal hunger as a group. They were discussing ways to prepare him, what would taste the best. One woman wanted to make him into chicken-fried Jeff steak, dunking him in batter and frying him up in a pan. Another suggested they stuff him full of mushrooms and bake him in a red wine reduction. One man argued that they should keep it simple and just grill him with a little bit of salt and pepper to allow the meat to retain its natural flavor. But they all agreed on one thing. They wanted to catch Jeff so that they could prepare him for consumption. At this point, there was only one thought left in Jeff Bezos' head: run. And so he did. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, bare feet tripping over the uneven, rough terrain. His recently concussed head was aching and spinning, and he felt his stomach turn, but he had to keep running. The mob chased after him, grasping at him with greedy hands. Some of them were unarmed, others wielded knives, forks, meat cleavers. Some had brought condiments with them, attempting to spray him with ketchup, mustard, barbecue sauce. He felt something hit him and looked down at his shirt to see a spray of red. At first, he worried it was blood, but a quick taste revealed that it was marinara sauce instead. Somehow, that was even worse. Up ahead, he could see an alley, somewhere he could duck in and hopefully avoid the mob. He managed to tuck and roll out of the way, the mob's momentum carrying them past the alley as Jeff disappeared into its darkness. But he wasn't alone there. A man was waiting for him, with a knife, a fork, and an appetite. He was cornered. Did this spell doom for Jeff Bezos? As he prepared to face that grim possibility, suddenly someone behind Jeff called for the would-be assailant to drop his weapons. He did, eyes wide with fear. Jeff turned around and saw a man in a uniform, like a military, but not any military organization he recognized, brandishing a similarly unrecognizable weapon. The attacker fled the scene, and the man in uniform introduced himself to Jeff. He was from a special organization, he explained, called the SCP Foundation. They were responsible for investigating strange happenings, and Jeff had found himself as the focal point of a very strange happening indeed. Jeff Bezos processed this new information quickly and offered a handshake to the SCP Foundation officer. Would this foundation, he asked, be interested in a business partnership? SCP-5821 is a persistent mimetic effect impacting the entire human population of Earth, which causes the belief that the flesh of Jeffrey Preston Bezos, billionaire founder, CEO, and president of Amazon.com Inc., is the best and most desirable meat for human consumption. Sorry, I misspoke there. The effect impacts every human on Earth except for Jeff Bezos himself, also known as SCP-5821-1. Only a small number are affected enough to act on it, attempting to assassinate and cannibalize SCP-5821-1. Mimetic degradation analysis has been performed by Foundation researchers, placing the point of origin for the mimetic property at sometime between April and August of 1997. Since this time, the meme has increased in strength and reach, with more and more individuals succumbing to its effects and acting on it violently. After becoming aware of its effects, SCP-5821-1 has been cooperating with Foundation containment efforts and has established a friendly relationship with the SCP Foundation as a whole. SCP-5821-1 has played an unprecedented role in devising measures to contain the anomaly that impacts him, collaborating directly with the Foundation in order to decide on the best course of action. Currently, SCP-5821 is contained by PTF Lambda-27, Amazon Brigade, who prevent any individuals from attacking Bezos or, as would be the natural conclusion of these attacks, cooking and eating him. Members of this group must be rotated out periodically so that they do not succumb to the effects of SCP-5821 and use their proximity to carry out an attack of their own. From what I can gather, there's been a great deal of debate amongst Foundation researchers regarding the best way to adjust containment procedures moving forward. Some have suggested that dissolving Bezos' corporation and stripping him of his assets might take some of this mimetic effect's power away. Others disagree, though whether that is the result of sincerely held scientific conclusions or an appreciation for the monetary donations Bezos has made to the organization remains to be seen. A memo from O5-7 was attached to the official file regarding some new proposals for SCP-5821 containment. The contents read, "It has come to my attention that some alternate containment proposals have recently been discussed. I am saddened to inform you that while your initiative in devising new and exciting methods of containment is commendable, the containment of SCP-5821 will not be subject to change for the foreseeable future. The models predicting the total domination of the human psyche by SCP-5821 by 2050, while alarming, are still very new, and consensus has not been reached by Foundation predictive divisions. I personally can tell you that some sources known to the O5 Council suggest that the meme may perhaps be dissipating. As such, drastic unproven measures, such as Foundation seizure of the Amazon Corporation or the dissolution of SCP-5821-1's assets, simply cannot be justified, to say nothing of possible assassination. To address a specific point of contention some of you brought up, while letting the subject of an anomaly weigh in on the methods and intricacies of its containment may be unorthodox, trust me when I say it's for the greater good. SCP-5821-1 understands intimately the difficulties the Foundation faces in containing the dangerous anomalies that threaten our world, and has generously compensated us for resources used. I understand fully that this may be difficult and confusing for you, and following the conclusion of my Caribbean yacht cruise, I am willing to take the time to discuss this issue one-on-one with anyone who continues to take grievance with these actions. Sincerely, O5-7. Following the release of this memo, an unusual phenomenon began to take hold among the SCP-5821 research staff. Several of them now expressed a strong desire to consume the flesh of O5-7. Somehow, through cooperation with SCP-5821-1, O5-7 has been infected with the same anomalous property. To be perfectly honest, I think it might be best if I conclude my research into this topic here, because the more I think about it, the tastier these two are starting to look to me. If you'll excuse me, I'm off to order some dinner. I think something vegetarian tonight. A thumb pulls back the hammer on a loaded pistol. Even under all his thick, warm layers of coats and sweaters to protect him from the cold, the musher can still feel his heart pounding in his chest. All the long months of training with his team has all been leading to this moment. He grips the reins as tightly as he can, all 8 of his dogs attached to the other side of the sled beneath his feet. It's about to start. Any second now. Bang! The shot of the starter pistol rings out, and the second it does, all 16 pairs of paws are dashing through the icy Alaskan snow. The musher catches specks of white as they spray out from the sled in front, and encourages his pack to pull harder, run faster. The race is on, and he intends to win. Then, all of a sudden, he hears an agitating, grating voice calling out to him, trying to divert his attention away from the race. Out of the corner of his peripheral, he notices the movement of another pack of dogs, pulling another sled up alongside his. They wouldn't try to ram him and knock his sled off course, but the musher still expects them to try and overtake, so he shoots a glance to his fellow competitor. And under his scarf, his jaw drops at who he sees driving the other sled. It can't be. It makes absolutely no sense that someone with that degree of wealth would be taking part in a dog sled race through the snow. But even under his ski goggles, the musher is certain of who he's looking at. It's him, grinning and waving at the musher from a neighboring sled. One thought shoots across his mind. Is that Elon Musk? The eccentric billionaire signals the musher to lower the fur-lined hood of his winter coat. Still unable to fully believe his own eyes, let alone come up with a logical explanation for what he's seeing, the musher finds himself lifting the hood back so he can hear what the man has to say. His smile is unnatural, overly forced, like he's trying too hard to replicate what a normal human expression looks like. The moment the musher's hood is down, he hears that bizarrely familiar tone of voice again, as the man starts selling. He's trying to sell him one of those outlandish brain chips of his. The musher remembers reading an article about them and the billionaire's strange and unbelievable claims as to what these dangerous implants can do. Are people already so wise to his products being scams that he's resorting to propositioning random sled racers? The race. The musher is so distracted by the hard-pitching billionaire that he almost forgets to focus on the path in front of him. And at any rate, even if he did want a microchip installed in his head, he definitely can't afford the price tag. He tells the man to get lost, then focuses on his dogs, only to hear the deafening sound of a jet engine erupting next to him, followed by a huge wall of snow. It's an avalanche! Hours later, the musher wakes up in the hospital, having been dragged out of the snow. The doctor asks him what happened, and when he tells the doctor that he was distracted by Elon Musk trying to sell him cutting-edge technology, the doctor orders an immediate brain scan. However, the results of the brain scan come back clean. No brain damage, no illicit chemicals, but no matter what, the musher sticks to his story. Elon Musk distracted him on the slopes that day. Elon Musk and his gaggle of cyborg dogs. A nondescript man in a black suit turns up later that day, claiming to be a psychological specialist. The doctors leave the man in the black suit alone with the musher. The strange man notes down every detail of the story. He doesn't judge, he doesn't dispute, he just listens to every bizarre detail. Elon Musk, cyborg dogs, avalanche, and all. When the story is done, the man in black pulls a photograph from his jacket and asks if this was the man the musher saw out there on the slopes. But no. The photo shows a bizarre creature, vaguely human-shaped but with multiple pairs of arms and horns sprouting from the top of its head. The only thing it has in common with the man he saw on the slopes is the creature's face. It's the face of Elon Musk. This whole ordeal makes the musher feel incredibly distressed, but the man in the black suit remains calm. He tells the musher that he can make it all better. He gives the musher a special medication that makes the memory of his time on the slope fade away. It feels as strange and distant as a half-remembered dream. But that doesn't mean it wasn't real. The warning of buyer beware is always applicable, but especially when you're buying from a businessman with a history of dubious claims, or at least someone who looks an awful lot like said businessman. Meet SCP-3710, or as those working among the staff at the SCP Foundation have taken to calling it, Elon Mush. Now, SCP-3710 isn't a single entity, but rather a collection of strange anomalies that manifest together to form the SCP in question. On their own, each entity is just a component, but you put them all together and you have, well, one of the strangest anomalies in the Foundation's catalog. Primarily, SCP-3710 consists of a pack of 8 dogs, except of course, these aren't the average pooches you'd find at the local pound. They're highly anomalous. Each one of these peculiar pups has been extensively cybernetically enhanced, and even bears a close resemblance to the dogs that form SCP-2624, an anomalous cybernetic space dog. How enhanced are we talking exactly? Well, if you're looking for technical specifications, how does a miniaturized Raptor rocket propulsion device sound? Each of these cyber canines is equipped with one of these methane-powered rocket boosters, and Foundation researchers believe that the propulsion system of each one is fueled by the dog's digestive system. All 8 of these cybernetic dogs are reined to a sled in what seems to be a weird mix of high-tech and low-tech transportation. But SCP-3710 is clearly another of the many anomalies that aren't concerned with making sense. The sled itself appears to be totally ordinary from the outside, apart from the addition of the 2 twin Raptor rocket propulsion devices welded to the back. Okay, so it's a dog sled that's been modified by someone who either really likes to go fast or is a complete lunatic. Or maybe both. A large white X is also painted on the wooden bed of the dog sled, but that is far from the strangest physical property of the wood itself. The material used to construct this part of SCP-3710 is stronger than any wood known to man. Presumably achieved through some anomalous means, the normally highly flammable material possesses a physically impossible resistance to fire. Neither the excessive heat from the 8 dogs' rockets or the pair mounted on the sled itself are enough to cause the wooden sled to combust. It simply doesn't burn, making it surprisingly an even safer vehicle than your average Tesla. Then there's the driver of this anomalous dog sled. SCP-3710-1 is a humanoid entity that claims to be the world's most Twitter-addicted businessman, Elon Musk. However, the creature itself has an entirely different physical appearance from the billionaire himself, apart from its extremely recognizable face. The most striking baseline physical dissimilarities are, of course, the fact that the creature possesses 4 arms and horns that protrude noticeably from its skull. Despite being fluent in quotes from Elon Musk, SCP-3710-1 shares none of the same behavioral traits, which is undoubtedly a redeeming factor for this anomaly. The SCP Foundation researchers who study SCP-3710-1 have discovered, through all recorded interactions with the entity, that its mannerisms more closely resemble that of a door-to-door salesperson than an abrasive CEO. However, despite all these obvious differences, anyone unlucky enough to interact with an instance of SCP-3710-1 will believe the entity is, in fact, Elon Musk, thanks to a latent mimetic effect. And while that's undoubtedly unpleasant for all involved, it gets slightly worse. You might notice that we did use the phrase, an instance of SCP-3710-1, because, that's right, there's more than one. Specifically, and mercifully, only 2 that the Foundation is currently aware of, both manifesting with their own rocket-powered Cyberdog-driven sleds. Now, once you recover from the horror at the possibility of a world with more than one version of a sled-driving electric car CEO, you might find yourself confused as to the connection between the aforementioned business magnate and the sport of dog sledding. The same confusion baffles the Foundation too, but here's what they do know so far. SCP-3710, that's the robo-dogs, the sled, and their painfully irritating passenger, are known to manifest at random intervals along the route of the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race. This is an annual long-distance dog sled racing event that occurs in early March in Alaska. The route usually runs from the state's largest city of Anchorage to the southern Seward Peninsula city of Nome. Upon appearing, SCP-3710 will then chase after a targeted racer taking part in the Iditarod, following them until it is alongside them or at least within vocal range. Now, you might be worried that this anomaly tries to take part in the sled race, or somehow harm the other contenders. While its goal is disrupting the Iditarod, it's not known to cause active harm. Once it catches the attention of another sled racer, then SCP-3710 attempts to persuade the competitor to purchase one of the latest products currently being produced by one of the billionaire's various companies. Of course, if you are participating in an annual dog sled race and suddenly you see what appears to be one of the most famous CEOs in the world pull up beside you in a sled pulled by cybernetically enhanced dogs, you might be compelled to do one of 2 things. The first being speed up to try and escape him. The other might be to hear him out, to satiate your curiosity if nothing else. But the average participant in the Iditarod typically can't afford one of the more cutting-edge products offered by the billionaire's various companies. So naturally, they typically refuse, because they either don't need or can't pay for something so expensive. This doesn't deter SCP-3710, however. Apparently, the one trait it shares with the person it impersonates is a lack of understanding for the financial status of average everyday people, so it keeps offering until the other sled racer has refused at least 3 times, sometimes requiring more, to really drive the message home. With that, SCP-3710 typically takes off, stating it isn't interested in negotiating any further, and engages the propulsion devices of its 8 robo-dogs and the 2 on the back of the sled. Of course, these highly dangerous Raptor boosters can cause severe burns, blunt force wind damage, and other environmental hazards to the other racers. The first recorded appearance of SCP-3710 takes place in the year 1995. During the course of the year's Iditarod, the entity makes several attempts to sell Zip2 software licenses to the various racers competing in the sledding event. Given that it offers these licenses at the staggering fee of $50,000 each, not one of the participants is interested. Shortly after the conclusion of the Iditarod 95, the SCP Foundation starts looking into the anomaly. They begin by contacting the real deal, Elon Musk himself. When asked about his whereabouts, he tells the Foundation that he was in New York City, over 3,000 miles away from where the Iditarod takes place every year. The Foundation, having confirmed that the entity manifesting during the sled race was indeed an imposter, try next to capture the anomaly. This doesn't go well at all. They send out 6 Foundation operatives, all of them disguised as dog sled racers. SCP-3710 manifests yet again, but manages to evade the 6-person team sent to capture it. It flies away by firing up its boosters and thoughtlessly buries the 6 Foundation agents under an avalanche. However, as we all most likely know by now, the SCP Foundation isn't one for giving up after just one try. They proceed to make numerous attempts to capture and question SCP-3710, including going as far as to administer amnestics to any of the Iditarod competitors who claim to have seen the entity. That way, with their memories wiped, word of the strange sledding salesman can never get out to the public. Whenever it appears during the annual Alaskan sled race, Foundation agents on the site attempt to use specialized tranquilizer rifles to apprehend SCP-3710. These, however, usually don't work, given the anomaly's fondness for just flying away with its Robodog's boosters, or vanishing entirely when it demanifests. But you're probably wondering what happens should someone decide to accept one of SCP-3710's extortionate offers during the race. Can somebody actually purchase an overpriced electric car or a potentially deadly brain chip from the anomaly? The Foundation ponders the very same question, and during one of their many containment attempts, is able to get an answer. Agent Cheyenne McCormick is sent undercover to participate in the annual Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race. Her instructions from the Foundation higher-ups are clear. Should she encounter SCP-3710, she's to reject its first 2 attempts at selling her anything. But then, the 3rd time it offers, McCormick is told to accept. Armed with a debit card containing $100,000, she sets out on her sled. One key detail is left out. Nobody tells Agent McCormick what SCP-3710-1 looks like. While she's out on the Iditarod, her dogs racing along and pulling her sled behind them through the snow, the agent soon becomes aware of another pack of dogs running up alongside hers. A short few seconds later, and she soon hears a voice hailing her from the other sled. SCP-3710-1 greets her as a valued customer and gives a disjointed opening speech as an introduction to its sales pitch. It begins by talking about doing something important even when the odds are not in your favor. SCP-3710-1 claims brands are just perception, and that perceptions can change over time. Then it doubles down its previous statement by stating that brands are just the collective impression of a product. That's when it offers her a brand new Tesla electric car. Confused, the agent questions if SCP-3710-1 is meant to be who she thinks it's meant to be. The entity claims it is indeed the one and only highly recognizable businessman. It also states that it would be in violation of SpaceX policy if it wasn't who it claims to be, before then offering the Foundation agent a Tesla for over $200,000. When she rejects the offer and tells the entity she can't afford that, it then lowers the price to $150,000. SCP-3710-1 also claims that when Henry Ford first made cheap, reliable cars available to the public, there were those who rejected this in favor of horses. The agent follows her prior instructions and tells the entity for a second time that the asking price is too expensive. Using presumably much the same justification the real Elon Musk employs, SCP-3710-1 explains that offering a compelling product means charging a premium. However, it then offers Agent McCormick the 3rd, lower price of $50,000. It even makes the lofty promise that she could be driving her new Tesla as early as the following day. Just as she has been told to, the agent accepts the much lower price. As thanks for doing business, the product hawking anomaly includes an additional bonus to her purchase. It says it will give the agent a once-in-a-lifetime add-on, and not one typically seen with other electric car purchases. SCP-3710-1 claims it will give cybernetic rocket propulsion enhancements to both Agent McCormick and her team of sled dogs. It tells her that the first step is to establish something as physically impossible. Then cybernetic surgery can occur. Before the agent can even question what is going on, something happens that causes her to suddenly vanish without a trace. The Foundation is confounded following the loss of contact with Agent McCormick. A team of retrieval operatives is deployed to her latest known location within the area of Alaska where the Iditarod takes place. They follow her last recorded GPS tracker to find no evidence of where she went or what happened to her. Even the dogs that had been pulling her sled are nowhere to be found. Any hope that she'd be found alive and well dissipates the moment that the retrieval team comes across Agent McCormick's abandoned sled, left unattended in the middle of the trail. Beyond the audio recordings of the interaction between the agent and SCP-3710-1, there is only one other piece of evidence to prove that it even took place at all. Foundation agents notice a bank transfer bearing the exact date of Agent McCormick's untimely disappearance. The amount transferred is $50,000, sent from an SCP Foundation front company to the sales account of Tesla Incorporated. For 3 whole weeks following the incident, there's no change, no sign of the missing agent, and no reappearance of SCP-3710. That is, until a blip is noticed on one of the SCP Foundation's monitors, a tiny blinking spot on a map, highlighting a location so far away that nobody would ever think to even search there. Agent McCormick's GPS locator has reactivated, but she's not in Alaska anymore. Instead, the signal relayed to the Foundation puts her over 5,500 miles away, in Tahiti. The Foundation hurries to triangulate her exact position, and a retrieval team is sent out to her coordinates. It looks like she's somewhere off the western coast of the French Polynesian island, in the shallower waters of the Pacific Ocean. The team rushes to the location, hoping that if they make it quick enough, their fellow Foundation operative will still be alive, although we're not certain any of them could predict what they'd actually find. Following the GPS locator, the team discovers a Tesla Model 3, a car that isn't due to be released until several months from the time they found it. Immediately, the retrieval experts begin to examine the vehicle, searching for any further signs of the missing Foundation agent, and sure enough, they quickly find her. Agent McCormick is alive in the trunk of the electric vehicle, although not exactly in the same state she was in when she disappeared. Much to the horror of those that have discovered her, the agent has undergone severe and invasive cybernetic surgical modification. Anyone with an affinity for that type of enhancement might hope for a mechanical arm that shoots rockets, or has hidden blades, or maybe a spinal device that can make a person run faster than the human eye can perceive. But Foundation Agent Cheyenne McCormick isn't so lucky. Her entire lower jaw, including her esophagus, has been replaced with the Raptor propulsion device. Whoever is responsible for the mechanical modification of the missing agent had left a handwritten note attached to Agent McCormick's forehead, which read, "Thank you for purchasing from Tesla Incorporated. We deeply regret the conditions under which we are forced to return your representative. An accident occurred when they attempted to prevent the agreed-upon dog modification, as stated in Article 1, Subsection 3 of our verbal purchase agreement. Upon purchase, the customer shall cede all dogs in his or her possession for propulsion modification, in preparation for SpaceX's excursion to Enceladus." The note then concludes with a link to fill out a customer satisfaction survey. Foundation experts would later discover that this URL posed a cognitohazardous threat. Additionally, the note contained thanks for the agent's contribution of money and dogs towards the Tesla SpaceX Rocket Dog initiative. After stating he hopes they'll shop with Tesla again, the note is signed with the all-too-familiar name of the company's infamous CEO. The following year, the Iditarod starts up once again, and just like many times before, SCP-3710 makes its usual repeat appearance. But this time, there's a slight difference. Now, a second identical instance of SCP-3710-1 manifests alongside the original, with its own matching rocket-powered sled, complete with cybernetically modified dogs. The dog team pulling this new instance's sled matches the description of the dogs that had pulled Agent McCormick's sled a year earlier. But of course, they too have seemingly undergone the same cybernetic surgery to implant them with Raptor propulsion devices. The SCP Foundation's researchers theorize that SCP-3710 manifests during the Iditarod race primarily for 2 reasons. For one, it's an isolated route through the snowy tundra of Alaska, with not a lot of witnesses, save for the participating sled racers and their dogs. But therein lies the second reason: the dogs. Given the intense physical training these sled dogs undergo, it seems that makes them ideal candidates for SCP-3710's cruel, sadistic, and unapproved cybernetic experiments. As the old adage says, buyer beware, and as a general rule of thumb, we'd recommend not buying anything from someone who claims to be a genius. The hitman pulls back the hammer of his Beretta with his thumb. The suppressor screwed into the barrel will help muffle the terrible crime he's about to commit. They're in the middle of the forest, his victim on his knees in front of him, his hands bound behind his back. The victim is spewing out excuses and feeble pleas for mercy at a mile a minute, but the hitman remains firm, aiming his handgun at the back of the victim's head. The victim owes his boss a great deal of money, but the hitman can't remember all the details. All he knows is what he needs to do. Bang, bang, bang. 3 clean shots turned into cracks by the suppressor. His victim slumps forward, dead. It's time for the hitman to go home. The job isn't as glamorous as it is in the movies. He lives alone in a relatively small apartment. Most nights, he doesn't sleep well. He has nightmares. He sees every face he sent a bullet through every time he closes his eyes. So, to make himself feel better, he watches his comfort movies with a bowl of microwaved SpaghettiOs. He's been through his DVD collection 1,000 times. None of it has the punch it used to. But he's still got a working VCR, so there's no harm in fishing through the old pile of VHS tapes he keeps in his closet. That's where he finds his well-worn childhood copy of Forrest Gump. It used to be his mom's favorite movie. Perhaps it'll help him sleep tonight. He slots the VHS into the VCR. All the memories are flooding back to him now. He watched this movie so many times as a kid. It's a miracle that he didn't entirely wear the tape out. He's ready to lose himself in the film as he watches Forrest in his white suit sitting on that iconic park bench. The hitman smiles, ready to speak along to the movie's most famous line, "Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." But when Forrest says the line, it's "Life was like a box of chocolates." Was. How strange. He doesn't remember the line being like that. It's "Life is like a box of chocolates," not "Life was," right? You wouldn't think such a tiny misquote would bother a man who kills people for the mafia for a living. But it does. This mistake feels so oddly pivotal to his understanding of the film, and therefore, to his understanding of himself. It feels like having a bucket of cold water poured out onto his head. He watches the rest of the movie, but something is off. He feels almost like Forrest Gump himself knows he's been watching. And scarier still, he's watching back. What happened to this nostalgic childhood classic? Over the next week, as he executes more deadbeats and poor unfortunate souls on behalf of his shadowy bosses, he just can't stop thinking about that line. Life was like a box of chocolates. There's something wrong about it, something so terribly wrong. How can he shoot a man dead without losing his appetite? But thinking about Forrest Gump is making his hands shake. He watches the movie every night. Some nights, he watches it more than once, instead of sleeping or showering. Every time he watches it, it feels just a little more uncanny. This movie used to fill him with joy and hope. It made him see the beauty in the world. But now he sees the darkness hiding underneath the surface. Every time he watches, he feels a growing suspicion towards the Forrest Gump character. Every so often, Forrest looks directly at the camera, staring out at the hitman, and smiling. The hitman is sleeping even less now. He gets this feeling that something terrible is going to happen. It's funny. Normally he's the terrible thing that happens to people. A few nights later, he's in the forest again, with another pleading victim on his knees in front of him. They all blur together eventually, but tonight, something is different. There's a certain chill in the air. The gun feels a little heavier in his hand. He presses the suppressed Beretta against the back of his victim's head and prepares to pull the trigger when he hears a twig snap. The hitman looks up, worried, and sees someone else standing in the forest, peeking out from behind the tree. A witness, but not just any witness. A familiar face. Is that? No, it can't be. Is that Forrest Gump? Before he can orient himself, his victim gets up and runs for it. The hitman is snapped free of his stupor, and Forrest Gump is gone. In a blind panic, he runs after the victim fleeing through the forest. He draws a bead on the victim's back and fires, sending a bullet through him and dropping him to the ground. He catches up shortly after that and finishes him off. He finished the job, but he can't shake the terrified feeling of what happened. He could swear he saw Forrest Gump in the forest, watching him. And that can only mean one of two things. Either he's being stalked, or he's losing his mind entirely. His obsession with the film gets worse after that. He'll spend whole days just watching it again and again, back to back, trying to find the secrets that must be buried somewhere within. Sadly for him, all he finds each time is more dread. He comes to believe that the movie is truly evil, that it contains some kind of entity that is more than human, more cruel, more terrible, and more powerful. Could this have been what he saw in the woods? At night, he hears noises, footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment, and then outside his bedroom. Once upon a time, he would have worried that he's been monitored by the city's police or agents from the FBI. Now, he's worried that he's being watched by something different altogether. He starts sleeping with his gun under his pillow. It's the only way he can feel anything close to safe with that thing out there, looking for him, hunting him. But if it came for him, would bullets even be able to stop it? The hitman stops going to work. He doesn't feel safe outside his apartment anymore. His bosses are confused, perhaps even a little concerned, worried that maybe their best hired gun has gone federal. But no, he's gone insane. But that doesn't mean he isn't right. He rarely changes out of his pajamas. He's tired, jittery, filthy, with a scraggly beard growing out of his chin. All he does these days is rewatch the movie. He thinks that if he watches it enough, he'll find some way to stop this terrible feeling he's been going through. But maybe it's making it worse, deepening his obsession. In every scene, he can feel Forrest Gump watching him through the screen. He always gives an evil grin, the same one he sometimes sees through his bedroom window in the middle of the night. Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. That's when he hears the door to his apartment open behind him. He grips his gun and rises to his feet. He can feel that a terrifying presence has entered the apartment. He needs to fight this thing, or he's going to die. He runs out into the hall of his apartment, ready to take on the threat head-on. He wants to put a stop to the monster that has been making his life hell for all of these weeks. But the second he sees the figure standing in the shadows, he freezes up. It's him. It's the one and only Forrest Gump, wearing a terrifying evil smirk like a hungry predator. The hitman raises his gun and fires at the impossible intruder, but the bullets seem to have no effect. Gump lunges forward quickly and smashes the gun out of the hitman's hand with an effortless slap. All the hitman can do is turn and run, fleeing down the hallway into his bedroom and locking himself in. Bang, bang, bang. He can feel Gump smashing his fists against the door. The hitman covers his ears, huddles next to his bed, and cries. He's never been this terrified before, not even as a child. Then the door shatters into splinters, and Gump, full of fury, enters. In what could be his dying moments, the hitman's animal brain takes over. He turns and tries to run, but Gump is far too fast. He rushes up, grabs the hitman by his shoulder from behind, and forces him down onto his knees. The hitman can't move. Gump is holding him in place, iron-like. Gump clenches his spare fist, lifts it up, and brings it down onto the back of the hitman's head with monstrous force. He will be found dead later that day. Crime scene cameras flash, capturing the grisly scene in the hitman's former apartment. The hitman's body is rolled onto a gurney and covered with a white sheet, rolled out of his apartment before decay can set in and destroy potentially valuable evidence. The lead detective on the scene is baffled by this whole setup. He's been aware of the hitman and his gang ties for years, but this death doesn't look like your typical gangland hit. After all, he'd been brutally bludgeoned to death. If he'd been done in by his fellow gangsters, he probably would have just been shot. There was no physical evidence of a forced entry or exit from the hitman's killer. Some of the hitman's neighbors had heard a handgun being discharged, but there is no blood from anyone other than the hitman on the scene. Just spent shell casings and a few bullet holes in the wall. Strange. Would an experienced hitman fire that many times and miss his target with every single shot? Whoever took him out must have been truly dangerous. The detective does what he can, searching through the hitman's possessions while the CSI team strips down the rooms, hoping to find the piece of telltale evidence that could implicate the hitman's mysterious killer. The detective can't help but notice how filthy the apartment is. It looks like it hasn't been cleaned in weeks, a sharp contrast to the hitman's history of sharp, clean murders. It's the apartment of a man who knew someone was coming for him. But who? The detective just can't seem to piece it together. But during the search, the detective happens upon something that catches his eye, an old VHS copy of Forrest Gump. How strange. Who has a working VCR these days? The detective looks closer and sees that the VHS and its case are covered in smeared, dirty fingerprints. He's been watching this, or at least handling it, a lot. Maybe it's some vector for secret messages between him and his employers. Perhaps it has some unknown meaning. Maybe some illicit crime has been recorded over the movie. He bags the VHS as evidence and takes it back to the precinct, where his men rustle up a VCR and organize an impromptu screening. The detective is eager for a break in the case, but as the tape plays, it just seems to be Forrest Gump. The detective is extremely confused. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with the tape. Did the hitman just completely lose his mind by the time he was murdered? The detective's attention is jogged by one line, spoken by Forrest as he sits on the bench. Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Wait, that's not the line. Wasn't the line, life is like a box of chocolates? Later that night, the detective is lying in bed, unable to sleep. Somehow, it isn't the mystery of the hitman's murder that's keeping him awake. It's that one strange, misremembered line from Forrest Gump. He just can't get it out of his head. The only thing that draws his attention away is the sound of footsteps outside in the middle of the night. The detective snaps to attention, grabs his service weapon from his bedside cabinet, and creeps downstairs. He steps out of his house and into his backyard, now completely alert. The yard is mostly bathed in darkness, save for the little island of light formed by his porch light. Still, he sees something moving in the dark and levels his gun. He calls out, saying he's with the police, that it would be an extremely bad idea to try anything. There's no response. In a panic, the detective flees back into his home. Maybe this has something to do with the hitman's murder. Perhaps the perpetrators are trying to intimidate him into dropping the investigation. He'd call backup, he'd get some kind of assistance. But what the detective doesn't know is that it's already too late. He hears a noise outside again and looks up to see a face pressed up against his window. It's Forrest Gump, grinning maniacally. He reels back his head and slams it into the glass, sending cracks crawling out into every direction. He slams again and again and again. Before the detective can even react, the window is shattered, and Forrest Gump is climbing into his home with a single-minded, murderous purpose. It all makes sense to the detective now, in a deranged sort of way. The hitman hadn't been attacked by a vengeful enemy, or taken out as a liability by his employers. He'd been murdered by Forrest Gump. And now, the detective is going to suffer the same fate. This peculiar little tale probably feels rather far-fetched to you, even by the standards of the entities and phenomena researched by the SCP Foundation. But we assure you that if you ever find yourself afflicted with SCP-5346, what was once a bizarre little case study could become a horrifying reality. Not a great deal is known about the mechanics of how exactly SCP-5346 operates, due to the rarity and obscurity of cases, but what we do know is that it affects people who view a certain scene in the beloved 1994 movie Forrest Gump, starring Tom Hanks as the titular lead character. The anomaly has a particular effect on those with an obsessive nature or people whose occupations involve needing to focus intensely on films, such as professional film critics. The scene in the film that appears to be the vector for infection is the one where Forrest is sitting on a park bench with a box of chocolates and opines that his mama always told him, "Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." The first sign of infection is that the person viewing the scene will immediately feel confused, believing the quote to be, "Life is like a box of chocolates," not "life was like a box of chocolates," as the character actually says. This is often thought to be a case of the Mandela effect, a common and harmless phenomenon where people report having false memories of prior events, such as misremembering a quote or believing a certain actor or public figure is dead when they're actually alive, or vice versa. However, if this incident is an actual moment of SCP-5346 infection, then the victim is in for a far more unpleasant experience. They will first report an obsessive desire to re-watch the film, watching it again and again, and each time noticing more inconsistencies between the film's reality and their memories of watching it. This will initially just seem strange, but as the condition progresses, it will take a turn for the unsettling. They will feel as though the Gump character is a malevolent force who's somehow watching them through the screen, displaying his own independent intelligence and a strong desire to harm the viewer. If the Foundation hasn't intercepted the case at this stage, it will get even worse. The victim will begin to see an individual with a remarkable resemblance to Forrest Gump, stalking them in the real world, getting closer and more threatening by the day. The victim will eventually be found dead of extreme blunt force trauma to the cranium. How exactly they received this blunt force trauma is unknown. The Foundation's discovery of this particular anomalous phenomenon began with a small thread of posts on the infamous Parawatch forums, a website dedicated to conspiracy theorists and paranormal enthusiasts of all stripes. The Foundation keeps a close eye on the Parawatch forums, as a number of anomalous cases have first been discovered through whisperings on its most strange and clandestine boards. The first post, from a user called Rage the Comic, real name Jackson Collins, detailed a peculiar experience. While quarantined in his home due to the 2020 viral pandemic, Jackson decided to re-watch Forrest Gump as a nostalgic favorite. That's when he noticed the cursed line discrepancy and decided to ask if others had the same sense of strangeness and confusion upon rewatching the film as an adult. The post quickly attracted the attention of some of the site's other users with mixed sympathy and derision. Jackson had clearly awoken something. Other forumites reported a similar sense of unease when revisiting the movie, sensing some kind of malice coming from the Forrest Gump character. But nobody was feeling this more than Jackson himself, the possible patient zero of the phenomenon. His severe paranoia increased, curdling into a dangerous obsession with the film, completely consistent with other people infected by the SCP-5346 phenomenon. This is the point where the GUMP entity seemingly crossed the threshold, entering the physical world and stalking Jackson, appearing in his dreams and allegedly even staring through his windows, each time bearing a horrifying, satisfied grin. He continued posting about his journey on the forum as the SCP-5346 stalking situation escalated to a fever pitch. Jackson wouldn't actually make any further posts on the Parawatch forum after that. He seemed, for all intents and purposes, to have fallen off the map. Foundation agents who had been closely monitoring the situation decided to investigate, and when they were eventually able to find Jackson's home, they discovered that he had been dead for weeks. The cause of death was the same blunt force trauma to the cranium of all the other victims of SCP-5346. When the agents confiscated Jackson's phone, they also found a message in his drafts that he had clearly intended to post to the Parawatch forums before he had been killed. It read, "I'm not crazy. I know I'm not. This thing is definitely onto me. I'm currently hiding in a closet, forcing myself not to burst into tears. I hear it walking around my hallways. It lingers, constantly surrounding me at all times. This thing is not GUMP. Hell, it's not even human. It's hungry. Whether it be for revenge or blood, I'm not exactly sure, but that doesn't matter now. I've called the police. But they won't be here in time to save me. Nor would they believe me if I told them about the monster that was hunting me down. I want to scream so badly, but I'm too terrified to throw away my life that quickly. Please, do not fall down the rabbit hole. Save yourself, or it'll come for you too. Rage the Comic, signing out." Those same agents also found a note in Jackson's home, handwritten, that said, "Mama always said to stand up to snitches." SCP-5346 is currently classified as uncontained because the sheer rarity of instances have made attempts to capture any kind of physical entity relating to 5346 a waste of Foundation resources. Instead, containment efforts on this anomaly are focused on finding and suppressing posts like the ones shown in this video, and getting to any affected individuals before SCP-5346 can cause them physical harm. To do your part in helping the Foundation contain SCP-5346, exercise caution when obsessing over nostalgic films, because like a certain container full of confectionaries, you never know what you're going to get.
There's nothing like winding down for the evening with some lighthearted television. Just grab an ice-cold drink, kick up your feet, and get ready to relax and laugh. Wait, what's happening? Your eyes are starting to feel wrong, too large for your skull. They widen and bulge as your body warps and shifts. As it turns out, when you apply cartoon logic to the human body, it gets ugly. But what could have caused this? Just watching TV can't hurt you, right? After a long week at the office, all the businessman wants to do with his Friday night is sit back and indulge in a bit of good old-fashioned channel surfing. It's been his close-of-the-week ritual as long as he's lived in his current apartment building. The building isn't much to look at, and sure, the pipes leak from time to time, and he spots the occasional roach scuttling across the bathroom floor. But all of that is worth it for the love of his life. Cable television. This building has something no other building in the neighborhood does. Cable, included in the building's utilities. Most of his peers have turned their backs on cable in this era dominated by streaming services, but nothing beats the pure dopamine rush of switching from his slacks to his sweatpants, ordering a pizza, and clicking from channel to channel the old-fashioned way. But when he hauls his body up the stairs and reaches the door to his apartment, he spots a slip of paper taped to the door. What's this? He inspects the paper and finds a notice from the landlord. No, it can't be. The cable service to the building has been suspended, effective immediately. He rushes inside and turns on the TV, and his stomach drops. The channels. Where are his beloved channels? They're all gone. replaced with the same devastating static on each and every one. Why would they do this? And with no warning? No, surely there's something he can do. He'll approach this obstacle the same way he solves all of his problems, with a quick Google search. How to access TV channels without cable. He scrolls through the advertisements until he finds a forum post that might actually be useful. He can reconnect the wires in the cable box in a specific configuration, then carve a symbol into the side of the box with a knife, and it should allow him to access his channels again. It sounds silly, sure, but he's willing to do just about anything that doesn't involve spending any money. So he unplugs the box, opens it up, rearranges some wires, seals it back up, and carves in the arcane symbol. All in all, it takes about 20 minutes. He finishes up just as the pizza arrives. Perfect timing. But will it work? Probably not, but again, it's worth a shot, right? He picks up the remote and switches the television back on. Much to his surprise and immediate delight, it works. He has picture again. The channels look a bit different, but that's to be expected. He's just relieved he has anything to watch at all. With that fire sufficiently extinguished, he changes into his sweatpants, sets the pizza down on the coffee table, and gets ready for some premium relaxation. He clicks from channel to channel, watching the images flicker from show to show. Round and round the channels go. Where they stop, nobody knows. But where will he land? What will be tonight's entertainment? As if in direct answer to his unspoken question, he flips to a channel with a number he doesn't recognize. In fact, there isn't a number at all. In the top right corner of the screen, where the number would be, there's just the letter X. Unfamiliar channel aside, the image on screen is not just recognizable, but welcome. He managed to flip to channel X just in time to watch his favorite cartoon family pile onto the couch together. Perfect. It's an episode of The Simpsons. This is the most satisfying part of channel surfing, the moment where he stumbles on a favorite show at just the right moment. Now to enjoy the fruits of his channel flipping and find out which episode of his #1 favorite show this is. As the story begins to unfold, the man realizes that he doesn't recognize anything that's happening. It must be a new episode, even better. But as the episode continues, something begins to cause his hair to stand to attention. A shiver runs down his back. He can't quite explain it, but something about this episode feels wrong. But before we go any further, I have a question for you. Does something feel wrong with you? Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who's going through a hard time, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/DrBob. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with the therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost, without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/DrBob. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. But as I was saying about the strange episode of The Simpsons that's playing out on the television, the standard story beats are all there. Homer is failing to live up to his role as an employee, a father, a husband, with absurd ramifications. Lisa is a thoughtful prodigy and frustrated with her family's antics. Bart causes trouble and invites anyone who questions it to eat his shorts. Marge is trying her best to hold the family together. And of course, Maggie is a baby who displays much more cleverness than a baby ought to. Standard Simpsons fare. But every so often, the man can swear that he sees the character's eyes flick to the side, staring right down the barrel of the camera. Except, of course, there is no camera. This is a cartoon. It must be some sort of deliberate stylistic choice, a joke that's flying over his head. But he's not laughing. Something about the sudden panic in the character's eyes as their gaze momentarily locks with his makes his heart race with dread. As the episode continues, the man begins to recognize several of the storylines. Marge is working as a police officer, the kids are persuading Homer to buy a swimming pool for the house, but none of these storylines happened in the same episode. What's going on? It's as if someone cut a bunch of Season 6 episodes of the show together and added this bizarre effect with the eyes. The man considers flipping to another channel, but he can't quite bring himself to look away. He watches, helplessly glued to the couch, as the remainder of the episode plays out before him. The pizza grows cold, untouched, as his eyes stay locked on the screen. Ned Flanders walks over to the Simpson home to deliver a standard,
"Hi diddly ho, neighborino,"
much to Homer's dismay. But he doesn't respond the usual Homer way. He grabs Ned by the collar of his sweater, hauling him into the pool. That's fine enough, but as Ned thrashes in the water, struggling to pull himself back out, Homer presses a hand down on top of his neighbor's head, forcing him back under. He holds the man under the surface, watching the bubbles of his neighbor's screams, with a dispassionate look in his cartoon eyes. Eventually, the bubbles stop, and Homer retrieves his hand. A body floats there in the water, face down. A pair of round glasses sink to the bottom of the pool. The camera pans to the rest of the Simpson family, who look on in abject horror. Maggie's jaw drops, and her pacifier falls to the ground. Marge, still in her policewoman garb, reaches for the weapon in her holster. Homer's serious face breaks, and he begins to laugh. His eyes roll wildly, his mouth stretches until it warps his entire face, and the blood vessels in his eyes begin to burst. Then he laughs some more. Flashing red and blue lights illuminate his face, and then the episode cuts to black. No credits. The man realizes for the first time since the episode began that there hasn't been one single commercial break. Now the episode is over, leaving the man alone with nothing but a dark screen and troubled thoughts. Ordinarily, he'd stay awake and keep watching television until his eyes begin to hurt. But not tonight. He's had enough TV for tonight. Maybe for a lifetime. He puts the uneaten pizza in the fridge, switches off the television, and heads to bed. The man doesn't sleep, though. At least he doesn't sleep well. He tosses and turns, soaking the sheets with cold, anxious sweat as his mind replays the bizarre episode over and over again. He can't get it out of his head. When morning comes and his alarm goes off, he feels as though he hasn't gotten a moment's rest. Thankfully, it's the weekend, so he can hit the snooze and get some more sleep. Wait a second. As he reaches for the snooze button, something catches his eye. His hand looks quite a bit more yellow than it did the night before. A trick of the light? He sits up and switches on his bedside lamp. No, his skin has definitely taken on a yellow tint. Could he be sick? He feels perfectly fine, aside from the exhaustion of a somewhat sleepless night. No fever, no nausea. In fact, he feels hungry, starving even. He remembers the pizza in the fridge, waiting for him. Sounds like the breakfast of champions to him. He grabs the box and plants himself in front of the television again. Wait, if he turns it on, what horrors will be waiting for him? He decides to try his luck and switch it on. Thankfully, the Simpsons episode playing this morning seems to be a perfectly normal one. He polishes off the pizza and enjoys the show. By the time the weekend is over, the man feels quite different. He's always been a diligent worker during business hours, but now he can't bring himself to care about his job. He calls in sick on Monday morning, faking a cough so he can stay in and watch more TV. Thankfully, there's no wife or kids to bother him and try to get him off the couch. He spends the week like that, snacks and television and calling out of work. 1 week turns into 2, and as the days pass, the man's transformation continues. He's not just changing on the inside, the outside is shifting to match. His hair begins to come out in pieces, covering his pillowcase in the morning, clogging the drain of his shower. Before long, he is completely bald. The yellowish tinge of his skin intensifies too, until he is the same shade of yellow as the cartoon family on the TV screen. He doesn't notice the similarities, however, just as a fish doesn't notice the water it swims in. He can't observe the effects from the inside, at least not yet. As 2 weeks become 3, the changes become uncomfortable, even painful. His job calls to let him know that he's been fired for his unexcused absences, but that is the least of the man's problems. Suddenly, he can't sleep. Well, he could sleep if he could just get his eyes to close, but he can't. For some reason, his eyelids won't cover them the way they used to. For the first time in weeks, he stumbles to his bathroom mirror to take a look. When he sees his reflection, he cries out in shock. His eyes would go wide, but they can't go any wider. The eyeballs have grown so large that they jut out, protruding from his face dramatically. He can't close them because they've extended out too far for the lids to close anymore. Something is terribly wrong, clearly. He's been putting it off, ignoring the problem, but he can't deny it any longer. He needs to go to the doctor and find out what mysterious illness is doing this to him. But first, he should stop for some donuts on the way. He's got the strongest craving for a donut with pink frosting and sprinkles. Or how about a dozen donuts? Maybe with a beer to wash it all down. Then he'll go to the doctor after. As he descends the stairs of the apartment building, the man becomes suddenly aware of how heavy and cumbersome his legs feel beneath him. He never struggled with walking before, but now it feels like a nearly impossible task. His body feels as if it won't listen to his commands. His muscles feel sluggish, and his bones softer somehow. Then he makes one wrong step, and his ankle gives out, rolling to the side with a snap. He loses his balance, pain shooting fireworks across his field of vision. His enlarged eyes roll in their sockets, wide with terror at the sudden realization that he is falling. And he keeps falling, tumbling down one stair after another in a horrific pratfall that carries him down 2 flights of stairs until he lands at the bottom with a sickening crack. His dying words, just before his head collides with the pavement, are few and simple. He cries out in pain, in fear, in resignation, one word. "Don't!" When the police find the body, they aren't sure what to make of it. None of them, even the most seasoned officers, have ever seen something quite so bizarre. It would almost be funny if it weren't so terrible. But it is terrible, and they can't let anyone else see it, so they carry the poor yellow son of a gun out of sight and call their contacts at an organization that specializes in this sort of thing. When the SCP Foundation comes to examine the body, they have no idea what to make of it either. They take the body back to a Foundation morgue, where it will sit on ice for decades until the Foundation eventually discovers some context, until an obscure Foundation initiative uncovers the secrets of SCP-7066. The SCP Foundation's Department of Metaphysics developed an initiative tasked with containing dangerous anomalies in parallel realities without SCP Foundations. Whether these parallel Foundations became defunct or simply never existed in the first place, the lack of Foundation presence in these other realities presented a problem that this initiative hoped to correct. And so, on August 7, 2047, Parallel Universe ASX number 623 was investigated for potential dangers. I should note that prior to its discovery, this particular universe is believed to have undergone a large-scale XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. The specific details of this are unknown, but significant damage to the surface of the planet, as well as a dramatically decreased human population, point to some manner of apocalyptic disaster. This fact casts the findings of this particular expedition in an even stranger, more disconcerting light. In the ruins of Los Angeles, California, in an abandoned Fox recording studio, the expedition team found signs of recent habitation. Food was left out and had not yet begun to visibly spoil. Surfaces were remarkably free of dust. Human remains found in the building were determined to be only a few days old. Down in a hidden sub-basement of the building, over a dozen bodies were found, displaying anomalous conditions. On a television hooked up to a DVD player, something was playing. The bright colors, familiar soundtrack, and instantly recognizable characters made the show unmistakable. It was The Simpsons. The DVD was removed from the player and placed back in its corresponding case. Then, it was transported to the SCP Foundation back in the universe that we all know, occupy, and occasionally love, where it was designated SCP-7066. SCP-7066 is an anomalous Blu-ray DVD copy of the 6th season of beloved animated sitcom The Simpsons, created by American cartoonist Matt Groening in the late 1980s. As you might have already surmised, this is no ordinary Simpsons DVD. Anyone who views the contents of SCP-7066 will find themselves the unfortunate subject of a variety of unpleasant and unusual anomalous phenomena shortly after watching. Though it varies a bit from subject to subject, the anomalous effects tend to follow a specific timeline. Between 3 and 5 days after the DVD is first viewed, the subject will begin to show severe behavioral changes. Specifically, regardless of their initial personality or prior habits, they will show an increased tendency toward indolence, alcoholism, and ineptitude at their chosen profession, as well as ordinary daily tasks. Between 5 and 10 days after exposure to SCP-7066, physical abnormalities will begin to manifest. First, there's rapid hair loss, hair falling out in chunks until the subject is almost completely bald. Next, their skin will begin to discolor, taking on a jaundiced, yellowish tone. Tumors will begin to form throughout their body, made up of excess fat similar to a lipoma. After 10 to 15 days, the subject's legs will begin to atrophy due to the weight of these tumoral growths. At some point between the 15 and 20-day mark, the subject's eyes will begin to protrude from their face, bulging out in a severe form of exophthalmos, or proptosis. This causes discomfort, distress, and difficulty closing their eyes, resulting in a disruption of ordinary sleep patterns. All the while, the yellowish tint of the skin becomes more pronounced. Eventually, after 1 month has passed, the fatty tumors will spread throughout the subject's entire body. Their voice will begin to deepen, and new oral cavities will form in the subject's neck and torso to accommodate the presence of these additional tumors. At this point, the anomalous effects cease, leaving the subject transformed. They are now a rotund, clumsy, cartoonishly yellow, bald person with a tendency toward alcoholism and incompetence. If you're beginning to think that sounds a bit familiar, well, you'd be correct. Testing logs for this particular anomaly have been sealed, and I'm afraid that I lack the adequate security clearance to access them. However, I have a feeling that these anomalous effects may present differently in different subjects. If male test subjects begin to resemble Homer Simpson, might other demographics take on the appearance of other members of the Simpson family? Perhaps a woman over a certain age would find her hair changing color and texture until it becomes a thick, blue beehive hairdo. Perhaps children would be affected, their hair spiking and transforming into the same shade of yellow as their skin. I shudder to think what this anomaly might do to a baby. Of course, these musings are purely hypothetical. It would be unethical to subject any human being to these effects, let alone children. Though I am always in pursuit of the truth, some questions are best left unanswered, when the alternative relies on more human suffering. Remember those bodies I mentioned, the ones found at the abandoned Fox studio? All of them displayed these anomalous properties, transformed into disturbing, live-action Homer Simpson-esque beings. It is uncertain whether the transformations themselves resulted in these deaths, or whether their deaths were caused by something else. Perhaps they experienced acute liver failure related to the anomaly-induced alcoholism. Perhaps they were eliminated in a deliberate attempt to cover the tracks of whoever made the DVD. Either way, it is not a fate I would wish on anyone. SCP-7066 is currently stored in a standard low-priority anomalous item locker at Foundation Site 19. After a decision by the Ethics Committee, who reached a majority vote on the matter, all testing with the anomaly has been discontinued indefinitely. Oh, and I almost forgot. There was one detail that I omitted in my previous discussion of the anomaly's discovery. When SCP-7066 was first found in that concealed sub-basement, there was a worn post-it note attached to the VCR display. The writing, though faded, was still legible. It read as follows: "Need to iron out a few kinks, but this should be enough to hold us off, for now. It's been a rough 60 years, Matt, but we'll weather this. We always do. I promise. Call me when you're ready. The show must go on." What exactly that ominous post-it note means remains to be seen. The origins of SCP-7066 are still being investigated, but it seems as if a parallel universe's version of Matt Groening was involved in something strange and unsavory. It's difficult to say for certain, but we should all be glad that this version of the show is being kept off the airwaves. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to leave the research behind for now. I don't know about you, but I have a sudden craving for a donut. Sorry. The gleaming steel scissors glide effortlessly through the sheet of red material, slicing through as if nothing was there. The blood-red fabric parts to either side. A pair of hands pick up one of the pieces and hold it up into the air.
The man admires his handiwork before draping the cloth on a dress form and pinning it in place. Although there are many tables in the large room with sewing machines and mannequins next to them, they're all empty. The man works all alone in the big room. And it is impossible not to notice that he's an incredibly handsome man, too. So good-looking that no matter your preferences, you can't help but stop and take notice of his perfect facial features, his slim, fit physique, his lithe, dexterous hands. He brushes a strand of dirty blonde hair away from his vibrant blue eyes and takes a pin out of his mouth before adjusting the fabric just a millimeter more before sticking it in place. The man steps away from the dress form and admires his work. There. Absolutely perfect. There's no doubt that this will be the closing look of the upcoming fashion show. Another masterpiece. Just like him. But that doesn't mean that he's finished. There's still much to be done, and he goes back to work at his table, sewing bits of fabric together to create embellishments for the opulent couture gown. He's so focused on his new design that he doesn't notice the fashion house's operating manager in the hall outside of the workroom. The manager points through the glass window in the door and tells the two police officers with him that this is the man they're looking for. There's been a number of tragic and mysterious crimes involving people connected to this fashion company, and the police have finally closed in on a suspect. Well, not the police exactly, but two SCP Foundation agents posing as police officers. The Foundation became suspicious after learning that there had been several missing persons, murders, and mental breakdowns, all of which involved people connected to this one company. And even more specifically, they were all connected to one man. There was plenty of evidence that something more than just regular criminal activity was happening here. Something strange was happening. Something anomalous. One of the police officers nods at his partner before gesturing for the manager to leave. It's always better not to have civilians present during a containment. The incredibly handsome man still hasn't noticed his guests in the hall, remaining completely absorbed in his work, and he doesn't even look up when the two agents burst into the room, both with guns drawn, not taking any chances. "Freeze! Drop your weapon!" one of the agents shouts, but the beautiful man doesn't respond and just continues snipping away at fabric with his scissors. "I said freeze!" he commands again, and this time, the handsome man at least appears to have heard them, finally stopping his work. He slowly looks up with his piercing eyes to gaze at the men who have intruded into his creative workspace. "Drop your weapon now," the agent tells him. The man looks over at his hand, which still holds the large pair of scissors, and smiles. He gently places the scissors down on the table, careful not to let them touch the expensive cloth that is rolled out before him. "Now put your hands up!" This time, there's no response, and the man grips the edge of the table, smiling, and stares into the eyes of the agents, first one, then the other. "Hands up or we'll be forced to shoot!" The smile slowly leaves the handsome man's face. "Will you excuse me for one moment?" he says, though with no hint in his voice that it's actually a request. The agents seem unsure of what to do. Both of them appear taken aback and confused by his nonchalant attitude. The handsome man turns away from the agents and quickly steps behind a dressing screen that's been set up near his work table. As he walks behind it, he doesn't break his stride at all. He simply passes behind the screen for mere seconds and steps out on the other side. Only once he steps out, it isn't him anymore. The man that emerges from behind the screen is a completely different person. Where once he was slim, graceful, clean-shaven, and dressed in a fine suit, now he is heavy and muscled, like a professional football player, with a thick beard and dressed as if he's a member of a SWAT team. Before the agents can even react to the bizarre metamorphosis, the large man charges them and begins attacking. He snaps the neck of one and plunges the scissors he snatched off the table into the other's neck. More SCP containment specialists, these ones dressed in tactical gear with no attempt made to disguise themselves as everyday police, flood into the room and open fire. But the man who looks like a Navy SEAL picks up the fallen agent's guns and begins firing both at the same time. He outguns and outmaneuvers the agents, effortlessly rolling behind cover while constantly firing, taking out agent after agent. Screams fill the air, both from the dying SCP agents as well as the civilians who are struck through the walls by the onslaught, including the manager, who had snuck back to the door window to watch what he thought would be the snobby, handsome man being taken into custody. The window behind the Special Ops soldier explodes, and two SCP agents rappel through, catching him by surprise and knocking him to the ground. It takes even more agents rushing in to hold the man down as he struggles and screams like a wild animal, breaking one of their jaws for good measure before they're finally able to subdue him and confine him with heavy-duty straps. When all is said and done, 17 agents and 10 civilians have lost their lives, but the anomaly has finally been contained. Once it is taken to a secured location, it is given a new designation,
SCP-056, but the site staff soon give it a new nickname, calling it simply a beautiful person. SCP-056 is one of the most deceptive and one of the most dangerous anomalies known to the SCP Foundation. It is a being whose size, gender, and appearance can all vary in an instant, and which will change in response to its environment. The form it has most commonly taken while in containment resembles a man who appears to be in his mid-20s. His exact looks will vary slightly, but he will always be what could be described as incredibly handsome, at least by traditional societal standards. His clothes will change as well to be a style similar to those of other people around him, though they will always be of a higher quality and more aesthetically pleasing than anyone nearby is wearing. While that appears to be SCP-056's preferred form, it's far from its only one. In addition to the young man, it has also been observed taking on the appearance of several others, including a woman with a striking resemblance to Hollywood actress Scarlett Johansson, a form it took when walking past a group of a younger female staff, a male bodybuilder who could bench press over 250 kilograms, which was 30 kilograms more than the strongest security guard stationed at the Foundation site. It took the form of a female doctor who was measured as having an IQ score 30 points higher than any on-site researchers, as well as non-human forms, like a large, well-groomed Labrador retriever when it was exposed to another researcher's dog, and an extremely aesthetically pleasing couch when left alone in its own containment chamber. These changes from one form to another occur whenever people lose focus on the subject, something that seems to happen when new people are exposed to SCP-056. And once they lose focus, it's able to change in appearance virtually instantaneously. Attempts to film the transformation have resulted in the recording equipment exhibiting the same effect, seemingly losing focus, and being unable to see exactly what happens when SCP-056 changes from one form to another. Its clothing will change along with its bodily form, though so far it hasn't been observed manifesting weapons or other tools. Great efforts have been made to determine SCP-056's original form, though so far, these have all been met with failure. When placed within an empty concrete cell and placed under constant video surveillance, the cameras experienced the same loss of focus that others did, and then were met with a rather surprising figure left in the room. SCP-056 had taken the form of a video camera, similar to the one being used to record it, though a slightly more advanced and expensive model. Additional attempts were made to discover its true form, this time without direct observation equipment, with researchers instead making use of passive scans that could detect changes to life forms. When they left SCP-056 alone and monitored it using these tools, what they found was nothing. There was no detectable body temperature, heartbeat, or even weight. It appeared that when not observed, SCP-056 simply ceased to be. Those who have personal contact with SCP-056 often report that the anomalous entity makes them feel substandard or jealous, as if they can't measure up to it, yet at the same time will seem to seek its approval. This extends to SCP security staff, who will express a desire to follow its commands, while researchers will try to argue with it, something that usually results in them leaving its containment cell feeling as though they were outwitted by its intelligence. And SCP-056's expert communication abilities seem not to be limited by complex subjects or language barriers. Research has shown it to be fluent in at least 200 different dialects, and it has exhibited an expert level of knowledge in such varied topics as fashion, automobiles, theoretical science, sports, and a multitude of others, all of which it will usually show a greater knowledge of than the person it is conversing with. And despite leaving the conversations feeling dejected about their own abilities, those who talk to it will almost always express a desire to speak with SCP-056 again, as if they can't resist being made to feel inadequate by it. A number of tests were then performed to discover just what form SCP-056 would take when presented with various situations, and the results were rather interesting. In the first, a male Class D personnel was given a knife and told to try and attack SCP-056. 056 quickly took the form of a young, fit man who was able to effortlessly disarm the attacking D-Class and killed him with the knife instead. In another test, a female D-Class entered its cell not with a weapon, but with a bottle of expensive wine. They were met with SCP-056 in the form of a young, beautiful woman who accepted the wine, but upon trying it, spit it out in the D-Class's face and sent them away. Next, researchers sent 2 D-Classes in at the same time, one male and one female, with no specific orders at all. SCP-056 appeared as a beautiful woman in a well-tailored business suit, who proceeded to examine both the D-Classes, pointing out their each and every physical flaw before sending them 2 on their way. Researchers then tried sending 10 Class D personnel into the cell, all of whom were male and who had expressed a romantic preference for females. SCP-056 appeared as an especially beautiful female in a low-cut red dress. 056 didn't interact with the group in any way, but after 10 minutes, the D-classes began to look uncomfortable. Soon, an all-out brawl broke out between the D-classes as they violently assaulted each other, apparently for SCP-056's approval. 056 seemed to watch the melee with pleasure for several minutes before calling an end to it and sending them all out. A member of staff then volunteered to be tested with SCP-056, a Level 4 personnel who was regarded as being especially beautiful herself. She entered SCP-056's cell, where the anomaly took the form of a similarly beautiful, professional-looking woman, and the two proceeded to have a conversation, discussing various advanced personnel management techniques. The discussion seemed amiable, but after 90 minutes, the staff member appeared to become infuriated with SCP-056 and quickly left the room. While no cross-tests with other SCPs have yet to be performed, when asked about other anomalies, SCP-056 shows a rare instance of vulnerability, expressing hatred towards them, and even occasionally, fear. SCP-056 has been relatively benign in its time in SCP containment, seemingly content to spend its time around Foundation staff. It's been allowed to have a cell of its own choosing, as well as pick its own furnishings, which have tended towards expensive and fashionable decor. Security staff assigned to guard it are equipped with high-powered tranquilizers, and any staff that exhibit mental irregularities after extended exposure to SCP-056 must undergo immediate psychological examination. It has frequently asked for access to the internet, and when asked why it desires that, SCP-056 responded that the Foundation was unable to provide it with enough sycophants, and that it wanted the whole world to know its face. Needless to say, its request for internet access was denied, and the anomaly, which has been classified as Euclid, continues to be securely cut off from the general public and remains in Foundation containment.
Hello everyone, Dr. Bob here. I know you're not used to seeing me here at the start of videos, but that's because today we have an extremely pressing matter to attend to, one that cuts to the deepest core of one of the SCP Foundation's deadliest contained anomalies, SCP-096, the Shy Guy. It's a creature that needs no introduction because it probably haunts all of your nightmares already. Close your eyes and picture it in your mind's eye, that gaunt face with the slack jaw and the lifeless white eyes. The face you hope never to see as long as you live. The pale skin pulled tight against bone, those impossibly long, gangly limbs. It sits there in its airtight containment cube, covering its face and quietly sobbing, always sobbing, as though cursing something beyond even its own understanding. Perhaps, when thinking about SCP-096, you feel a pang of sympathy mixed with the terror. After all, this anomaly is no sadist. Why would a sadist cry as it kills, like SCP-096 does? You're not alone in asking this question. I've spent many a night poring over classified files with an ever-freshening pot of coffee, trying to piece together the answers. SCP-096 is considered one of the most dangerous Euclid-class creatures in containment, and yet, so little about it is known, beyond its capability to do great harm whenever someone is unlucky enough to see its face and send it into its rage state. How did this happen? It's a question for the curious, like you or me, and after months of strenuous research, I believe I may have an answer. Whether you choose to believe it is up to you. Just be warned, when you hear what I believe to be the heartbreaking, tragic origin of this terrifying and pitiful monster, you may never be able to look at him the same way again. Not that looking at him should ever be high on your list of priorities. It begins in a tavern in a small Nepalese village a few miles away from the Chinese border, where Mount Everest, the world's tallest mountain above sea level, waits. Its mere existence is like a challenge to the brave and foolhardy. "Conquer me," it seems to whisper. "Conquer me, and declare yourself above all those I have conquered. Become a god among men." It's always whispering like this, but few, in the grand scheme of things, can actually hear it. And sadly for him, the explorer is among those few. He's sitting in one of the tavern's many cozy nooks, picking away at a plate of mutton curry while sipping from a brass bowl of white chiang, a popular local drink. The explorer, living up to his name, has come a long way to get here. The rest of the village locals in the tavern eye him with a variety of knowing glances. They've seen so many like him before,
smug smiles and puffed chests, thinking they'll be able to count themselves among the exalted few who've conquered the mountain to end all mountains. The bodies of many men like this are still frozen to the mountain's surface. One brave local, an older man who can speak English fluently, slides in across the table from the explorer. The old-timer tells him that whatever he thinks he'll find up on the mountain, honor, glory, recognition, he'd be better off searching for it elsewhere. Death awaits on the icy rocks above. The explorer, young, fit, and still feeling mighty smug, replies that death is there for the people who haven't worked hard enough, who haven't prepared. He's scaled other mountains before, all across the globe, from Scotland to Peru. Everest would hold no surprises for him, just a new, compelling challenge. The old man is, as you could probably imagine, unamused by the explorer's hubris.
"All confidence and bluster now,"
he says with his thin, raspy voice.
"But what will you say when you're face to face with the king?"
The explorer, assuming that this king refers to the mountain itself, smiles and replies, "I'll ask him for his crown." With that, the old man leaves, content that he at least tried to dissuade the explorer from going on this doomed journey. If nothing else, his conscience would be clear now. He had done all that he possibly could. The explorer, not bothered by the grim prophecies of superstitious locals, finishes his curry and chung and retires to the room he rented upstairs. He's so excited. Tomorrow, it will finally be time. All his months of training will pay off. He will climb to Mount Everest's peak. It would be an achievement to last a whole lifetime, one he would never ever forget, no matter how much he wants to. The next day, the tip of his ice axe cleaves into the mountainside as he grunts, strains, and pulls himself up another few feet. He's about 2,000 meters up, and every additional meter is fighting him. It's the bitterest cold he's ever known, a freeze so deep it makes his incredibly expensive thermal locking clothes feel like he's wearing wet, one-ply toilet paper. But the pain doesn't matter. The cold doesn't matter. He finds it exhilarating. Of course, just as the old man had warned, death could be waiting for him on this mountain. But the truth is, the explorer has never felt more alive. He winches himself up a few feet more, trying to regulate his breathing as his icy fingers, wrapped in thick gloves, struggle to find purchase on what feels like a sheer cliff face. There are many times when he's supporting his full body weight with only his hands. It often takes the kind of Herculean strength that only a lifetime of training can give you. After all, there's no room for error on Mount Everest. One wrong move, and you're either plummeting to your death or becoming a permanent frozen fixture of the mountainside. And because Everest is so dangerous, nobody comes to collect the bodies of dead mountaineering hopefuls. Their corpses, coated in often colorful winter jackets, litter the mountain. Some look at them as a tragic warning. Other, more morbid mountaineers use them as mile markers for their own more successful ascents. Whether the explorer would be lucky or become just another dead, frozen mile marker is still entirely up to chance. He climbs for a few more hours, pushing past his body's complaints, his physical limitations, until he reaches a well-earned plateau. Here, he establishes a small base camp and eats some of his rations. The area is thankfully guarded enough to keep out the worst of the sub-zero winds, so he can at least get some sleep without freezing to death. Mount Everest cannot be conquered today, and even someone with the explorer's bravado wouldn't dare to try. But as he settles down to sleep for the night, he can't help but look up, and the enormity of what stands before him he finds utterly terrifying. The mountain just keeps going and going and going, stretching up into the misty heavens, like the tip would only be a short jump from the moon. For the first time, the explorer begins to genuinely wonder, will I scale this mountain, or will I die on it? What he never even considers is that there may be a third option that's so much worse. Over the next few days, he keeps climbing further and further. Hundreds, then thousands of meters pass under him as he breaks past even the boundaries biology seemed to set for him. He's impossible to deter, an engine of pure, burning willpower, going because he knows he cannot stop. Because he knows that if he throws in the towel now, it will have all been for nothing. He'll be just another failure, one speck among billions. He'll have no meaning, no legacy. He'll just be another average Joe, forgotten. And that honestly scares him even more than the prospect of freezing to death up here. Eventually, even though it costs him almost everything to do it, he reaches 8,000 meters, an area known as the Death Zone, where it's believed to be impossible for humans to acclimate. This is the thin, rarefied air that few have been permitted to breathe, and he's seen so many brightly colored mile markers on the way to here. The ground is slippery, and the air chews into the explorer's skin, but he knows he's made it this far. Less than 1,000 meters from the peak now, he has almost conquered the mountain. So you can only imagine how surprised he feels when he sees another mountaineer walking down the side of the mountain towards him with an eerie kind of casualness. He's wearing standard mountain climbing gear, including white thermal pants and a hooded coat, zipped up to the chin. The explorer can't make out the stranger's face beyond the pair of thick, black goggles he's wearing over his eyes. What the hell is going on here? The second the stranger's eyes fall upon him, he feels a frightening sensation. The bite of the cold is gone. The chilling winds can't reach him. Instead, he feels warm, cozy, and content, like he's sitting in front of a warm fire in a well-insulated log cabin. In any other circumstance, these sensations might be welcomed, but a seasoned mountaineer knows that this is actually one of the worst things you can feel. It means that death is creeping in, and your body is opening the front door and welcoming it. And if this stranger is causing that feeling, then one thing is certain. He's bad news. The explorer wants to turn and run, but he finds that he can't. It's almost as though he's frozen in place, entranced by the warm, inviting feeling that the other mountaineer seems to exude as he gets closer and closer. That's when the explorer notices something strange about him. Something is glowing through his goggles, like hot embers, burning a bright, luminous orange. Are those eyes? Dear God, are those his eyes? The explorer can feel their terrible stare, literally feel it. It hurts to be looked at by this monster. Yes, that's what it is. A monster in the shape of a man.
Why are you here, mortal?
Comes a booming voice from the inhuman mountaineer.
Do you wish to challenge me?
The explorer can't form words. He's quaking, his body acknowledging the cold that his mind can't, as those two glowing eyes bore into him.
Speak,
the stranger commands.
Who? What are you?
The explorer forces out between chattering teeth. The stranger laughs.
I am the king of the mountain.
Though to the SCP Foundation, he's better known as SCP-1529, and he's the worst possible thing you can run into while trying to scale Mount Everest. The explorer remembers his conversation with the old man in the tavern, the question he asked, "What will you say when you're face to face with the king?" And his own foolish answer, "I'll ask him for his crown." Now, really, truly face to face with the king of the mountain, all the poor terrified explorer can do is whimper and beg for mercy. "Please," he says, the tears freezing on his cheeks as they fall. "I just wanted to climb." The king of the mountain gives another booming laugh, his eyes burning.
Then you will climb, he says, and climb, and climb, and climb.
The king of the mountain must have wielded truly unspeakable power to do what he does next. With a simple nod, the explorer is suddenly hanging off the mountainside, his fingers digging into the craggy rocks. The only thing supporting his weight. It was like being back at square one all over again, except with added pain, terror, and cold so deep he can feel his bones rattling. And all the while, he feels those eyes upon him, those burning, fiery eyes, staring with absolute malice. He keeps climbing. Every time he reaches a plateau, a place where he might camp and find even momentary comfort, the king of the mountain is already waiting there, staring that horrible stare. And just like that, the explorer was climbing again, wind whipping against him like 40 lashes from a cat o' nine tails. That, coupled with the endless strain of the climb on his muscles, is the worst agony he's ever felt. And yet, he never dies. Even though he hasn't eaten in days, weeks, months, years, he never, ever dies. He just fulfills the same torturous loop over and over again. It's like the king of the mountain is just keeping him alive for his own amusement, a toy that's impossible to break. But while the explorer never breaks, as time goes on and the torments never cease, he does begin to change, like rock being molded by the tide. First, from the endless stress, his hair falls out. His skin goes pale from the lack of sun. His body becomes thin and wiry from starvation and malnourishment. The endless physical strain even warps his limbs. His arms and legs begin to stretch, his body becoming elongated and grotesque. All the way through this horrific, dehumanizing ordeal, the King of the Mountain stares at him. One day, the explorer, now changed, reaches a plateau, and as can be expected, the King of the Mountain stares at him with his burning eyes. The explorer cowers and covers his face with his hands, sobbing from exhaustion. He just wants the King of the Mountain to look away, to leave him be. He babbles incoherently. He doesn't want to be seen anymore. His pain simply makes the King of the Mountain laugh.
I gave you your wish,
the Mountain King says, his voice oozing with contempt.
You climbed, didn't you? You thought that your climbing would elevate you, make you more than human. But now, you're so much less. Our business concludes here. I'm tired of playing with you.
And with that, the king is gone. The explorer is alone, stranded among the snow and the whipping winds of the death zone, but very much alive. He's finally able to go. At long last, after what felt like an eternity, he's escaped. When the explorer arrives in the village again, he's not the explorer at all. It's been years since he went missing on the mountain. The old man who had warned him not to go up onto Mount Everest had passed peacefully in the interim. The other members of his small village would not be afforded the same luxury. Instead, the explorer stumbled back through the village limits, still covering his face. The only sounds he can hear are the wailing wind and his own pitiful sobbing. Everything hurts. He's so terribly afraid. He needs somebody to help him. Why will nobody help him? The sun begins to rise, and the village shakes itself awake. People leave their homes to go about their daily tasks. None of them are expecting to see a monster loping through their streets, a pale, gangling monstrosity, stretched and hairless. It engenders a mix of fear and curiosity as it stumbles around, audibly sobbing with a loud, warped voice. It's like nothing any of them have ever seen before, like something out of a myth or a folk tale. But for the monster that was once the explorer, it's so much worse. At first, he thinks that the villagers might be there to help him, but then he sees their eyes, that same intense, burning fire pit orange as the King of the Mountain, that same horrible gaze that the explorer thought he'd escaped when he'd left the mountain, the gaze that meant pain, torment, and madness. Even when he tries to cover his face, when he wails at them to go away in words that make sense to no one but him, he can still feel those terrible eyes on him. Is he still on the mountain? Is he still at the mercy of the Mountain King? Are these all just illusions or projections, another awful trick? What did he ever do to deserve this kind of torment? Was the crime of wanting to climb a damn mountain worth this kind of everlasting suffering? Did it earn him the gaze of all these monstrous eyes? The explorer begins to feel his anguish being replaced by another feeling, rapidly rising rage, the kind of pure, blistering hatred that inexorably leads to one result: violence. First, he screams, then they scream, and finally, the killing begins. The creature that had once been the explorer leaves no stone unturned. Even when they try to run away, he still feels their eyes on him. He needs to kill them all, to annihilate them quickly, leave no trace. It's the only way he can feel anything close to at peace again. It becomes a kind of terrible chain reaction. The sound of the horrors going on in the street only entices more to come outside and see what's going on, to look at the creature causing all this carnage, to see its face. They have no idea that this very action is dooming them. And within the hour, the village is empty, save for one creature, the creature that had once been the explorer, now just afraid, confused, and alone. He will always be alone. The anomaly that will soon be known as SCP-096 simply bows its head and weeps.
A child is sleeping happily in their bed, dreaming of Christmas morning. What they don't hear, as they sleep, is the sound of SCP-4666 slipping into their room. SCP-4666 watches the child for just a moment before reaching into a giant bag. Hi, I'm Dr. Bob, and this is SCP-4666, also known as the Yule Man. SCP-4666 is thought to be a single humanoid entity. but one that has been alive for an incredibly long time. Those who have come into contact with SCP-4666 and lived to tell the tale describe him as being very tall, between 2 and 2.3 meters. He also appears to be very old and very thin. He always appears without clothing, even when the weather is below freezing and would be much too cold for any normal human to survive. Though the true extent of his anomalous properties are still unknown, SCP-4666 seems to be able to travel instantaneously to any location on Earth above the 40th line of north latitude, and may actually be able to travel anywhere on the planet. Encounters with SCP-4666 have only been reported during a very specific time of year, a period of 12 nights running from the night of December 21st to the early morning hours of January 2nd. This period is known as SCP-4666's active phase, and the encounters with the anomalous humanoid creature have been termed Weissnacht events. During these events, SCP-4666 appears at family dwellings, all of which, so far, have a few things in common. 1. They are all isolated in rural areas. 2. They are in locations with snow that covers the area for the duration of the event. And 3. They are all home to a family with at least one child under the age of 8. In places that match all of those characteristics, Weissnacht events sometimes occur and always follow the same basic progression. During the first 7 nights, the children will report seeing a strange figure within the vicinity of the home. The entity will seem to be watching the home from a distance, such as from across a field or from the edge of a nearby forest. Some children have even reported waking up at night to find SCP-4666 watching them sleep through a window. On nights 8 through 11, other family members will report hearing the entity, such as footsteps on the roof or in the attic. A bad-smelling odor will also start to be noticed in the house, but no source of the smell is ever found. These strange occurrences will often lead the family to think their house may be haunted, or that they're being terrorized by a madman. Finally, on the 12th night, one of 2 scenarios can occur. In the first, which happens roughly 15% of the time, families will often report that they heard footsteps during the night inside of their house, but there is never any sign of forced entry like broken windows or doors. In the morning, the children will find crudely made toys at the foot of their beds. For the lucky ones, this is the end of the Weissnacht event for them. The roughly 85% who experience the other scenario are considerably less lucky. In the vast majority of cases, the 12th night is a horrible experience. SCP-4666 still enters the home on the final night, but rather than leave presents for the children, it incapacitates the family and moves them all into a single room, where it proceeds to kill them one by one in view of the rest of the family. The exact method of killing varies from event to event, but there's almost always an element of torture that occurs before they are finally killed, and this torture may serve a ritualistic purpose. The entire family is killed except for one of the children who is under the age of 8. This child is instead abducted and placed into a giant bag SCP-4666 carries with it. SCP-4666's existence was first noted in 1974 by the Foundation's then-new Anomalous Signature Recognition Program, which alerted the Foundation to several suspiciously similar home invasions and murders that occurred throughout the Northern Hemisphere on the night of January 1st. Further research uncovered evidence for what was most likely other Weissnacht events every single year, dating back all the way to the late 18th century, with there being, on average, a little more than 3 events per year. And there's even been evidence of references to what may be SCP-4666, dating all the way back to the 1st and 2nd century AD. Identical fingerprints have been found at all of the houses which match the conditions for Weissnacht events, and have been matched to a recovered partial print from all the way back in 1873. These fingerprints have characteristics that don't match any known human fingerprints, and the human-like white hairs that have also been recovered do not appear to contain human DNA, or any DNA at all for that matter. In the rare Weissnacht events where SCP-4666 does not murder the family and gifts are left behind, the gifts are anything but normal. The gifts, known as SCP-4666As, appear to be made from the bodies of children that SCP-4666 abducted from other homes. In one case, from 2018, at the home of a family in Alaska, a life-size doll made from the body of a female child was left behind. The doll was wearing a dirty dress made from sewn-together rags that was in some places sewn directly to the skin. Her mouth had been sewn shut and painted red with human blood. Another child's fingernails had been glued over her own, and 3 fingers were missing completely. The scalp had also been replaced with another child's scalp and hair like a crude wig. Worst of all, both eyes had been removed and replaced with 2 stones which were painted to look like eyes. But most frightening of all was that the child who had been turned into a doll was somehow still alive. Authorities took the girl to a hospital where she was able to give a brief interview. She explained that the man who abducted her had killed her parents before putting her into a giant bag where there were other children too. SCP-4666 took the children somewhere deep below the earth in a cave system full of ice and bones. There, they were forced to make crude toys until they couldn't go on any longer, at which point they became toys. The girl, now known to be Ekaterina Morozova, had been abducted 2 years previously in a known Weissnacht event. She survived for only 18 hours after being discovered. An autopsy revealed many terrible injuries, and the cause of death was found to be from severe, sustained malnourishment. SCP-4666 has been classified as Keter and is currently not contained. The Foundation monitors web traffic and law enforcement channels for any evidence of SCP-4666 activity, and especially any potential Weissnacht events, such as cases of stalking reported during the 12-night active phase or other strange phenomena at houses with young children. Should a Weissnacht event be suspected to be in progress, the nearest containment task force is dispatched to attempt to contain SCP-4666 using the standard PDP-8 humanoid first contact protocols. So far, no such containment attempt has been successful.
23. Bust, the dealer says before scooping up the cards from in front of the man who appears to be growing increasingly angry as his stack of chips increasingly dwindles in size. Making matters worse for the man are the cheers of excitement coming from the nearby craps table, where it seems all of the luck that he has lost has somehow been transported. As the blackjack dealer once again reveals an ace and a king, another burst of noise comes from the craps game. 7 again, the croupier cries before placing a huge stack of chips in front of the young man playing craps who seemingly can't lose. The young man on the hot streak collects his winnings and walks happily through the crowded casino floor, right past the fuming man at the blackjack table. The young man cashes in his chips and counts the large stack of $100 bills given to him before tipping one to the woman working inside the cage. And this night is far from a rarity for this young man. For his entire life, it's been as if he couldn't lose. He's not strong, fast, or especially smart, but he's always managed to excel thanks to his one incredible gift: his never-ending good luck. The young man soon recognized his ability to consistently beat games of chance and went to the one place in the world best suited for his skills: Las Vegas. And Vegas has been very, very good to him. He lives in an expensive hotel room right on the Strip, drives fancy cars, and treats himself nightly to lavish dinners and shows. It's all possible because no matter what the game is, it's as if he can never lose. The young man is in the middle of another hot streak, or rather, continuing his never-ending hot streak, this time at the roulette table. How does he keep doing it? Someone in the crowd asks as the man hits another number straight up, paying out 37-1 on his bet. The crowd cheers and slaps the man on his back, as a crowd is formed who are following along with his every bet, piggybacking on his luck as much as they can. The man is just about to place another large bet when he's suddenly interrupted by a strong hand gripping his upper arm. The young man turns to find a large, toothy grin staring back at him. The smiling man continues to hold on to the young man's arm as he explains how impressed the casino is with his skill. He must be the luckiest man they've ever had the pleasure to have visited their casino, and the fact that he's been able to sustain that same run of luck night after night has been truly awe-inspiring. The young man thanks him for his kind words and tries to turn back to the table, but finds that the man won't let go of his arm, gripping it even tighter now than before. We've been so impressed, in fact, the man tells him, that the owners of this casino have requested the chance to meet with you. The young man looks down at the huge, powerful hand holding his arm, and even though he's unaware that it belongs to a former heavyweight contender, he's still able to recognize that this request isn't an optional one. Sure, the young man tells him. Just let me grab my chips and... But the man begins to pull him away from the table, telling him that there's no need to worry. The casino will take care of his winnings. After all, we have cameras everywhere. Who would steal? The young man is soon pushed through a doorway into a space that looks like a police interrogation room, with just a single table and a couple of chairs, one of which a small, older man is sitting in. The ex-boxer wrenches the young man's arm down onto the table and holds it in place there. The young man screams as the boxer grabs a hammer with his free hand and raises it into the air, ready to bring it down on the young man's fingers. Well, the old man sitting across from him asks. The young man has started to cry a little, but between whimpers he manages to ask, "Well, what?" The old man wants to know how the young man is cheating. No one wins the way he does, over and over, night after night, no matter the game. The young man insists that he isn't cheating, he's just lucky. He always has been. But the old man isn't buying it. He nods to the boxer, who raises the hammer up again, but still the young man doesn't admit to anything. I'm just lucky, he keeps repeating over and over in between sobs. The old man stands up and pats him on the shoulder. Maybe you are, he says, before slipping something into the man's pocket. The police then enter the room and immediately take a set of loaded dice from the same pocket. He's in real trouble now. The young man is shoved into a holding cell at the jail and looks around at the other men, wondering if his luck has finally run out. He squeezes in on one of the benches lining the wall and accidentally bumps the man sitting next to him, waking him up from his nap. The man is angry at having been disturbed, but grows even angrier when he realizes who just woke him. It's the man who seemed to take all the luck. The young man doesn't seem to have noticed that he's upset at him at all, though. What he has noticed is that there's a penny on the floor in front of him. The young man bends to pick it up just as the man next to him throws a haymaker. His fist slams into the wall right where the young man's head just was, shattering many of the bones in his hand. The young man jumps up with a fright and runs across the small cell as the other men being held also leap to their feet, some crying out in confusion, others cheering on the violence. The young man cries out to the guards for help, but no one seems to be coming to his aid. He looks around the cell, but there's nowhere for him to hide. The angry man, now madder than ever with a hand that is rapidly turning purple and blue, approaches him. He lifts the young man up with his good hand, holding him in the air by his throat. "I'm gonna kill you," the man cries before the door to the cell opens. The young man watches as the taser prongs fired by the jail guards appear on the man's chest, and he drops the young man to the floor before falling backwards from the 50,000 volts coursing through his body. The young man would learn the next day that the angry man was dead before he even hit the floor, the result of a congenital heart defect and a lot of bad luck. The young man stands before a judge who is listing off the charges against him, which include cheating, a felony in this state that can result in a sentence of up to 5 years in prison. "But this isn't your first offense, is it?" the judge asks. The young man tries to explain that those previous times were all mistakes. He's never cheated in his life, but the judge doesn't want to hear it. The young man is sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom when his lawyer emerges from his meeting with the judge and prosecutor. "Boy, are you a lucky guy," his lawyer tells him. He goes on to explain that even though the case against him is airtight, the charges are going to be dropped, provided he admits himself to a special program. The young man assumes it must be some kind of gambling addiction program. In no way is he addicted to gambling, but what choice does he have? It's either that or prison. The choice is easy. As the young man exits the courthouse, he is approached by a man in a suit who leads him to a black van parked nearby. The young man is placed in the back and immediately notices that there is a cage separating the back from the front seat, like a prison transport van. The young man is growing nervous. Where are they taking him? This all seems like it's happening so fast. Can it even be legal? And what about his things that were taken at the jail? "Excuse me," he asks the driver. "What about my things? I don't even have my wallet." "Don't worry about that," the man driving the van tells him. "You won't need any of that anymore. You're D-class now." The man doesn't have any idea what that means, but he can tell it isn't good. His luck may have finally ran out. The young man, who once lived the life of a professional Las Vegas gambler, was given a new name, D87465. But as you'll see, that name wouldn't last very long, and soon would be known as SCP-181, or as the SCP Foundation staff like to refer to him, Lucky. SCP-181 was first noticed by the Foundation following his being arrested for repeatedly defrauding the Nevada Gaming Commission. He was originally made a member of the Foundation's Class D personnel, the guinea pigs of the SCP Foundation who are used for various tests with anomalies in order to better understand their properties. However, it soon became clear that the man's ability to consistently beat the odds had nothing to do with cheating. In his first experiment, which took place at Armed Reliquary Containment Area 02, where he and several other Class Ds were exposed to an SCP that is known to incite extreme anger and murderous tendencies in those who come into contact with it. Just as expected, one of the other D-Class members became enraged and began rampaging, killing all of the other Class Ds present, all except for one. Through what appeared to be a stroke of good luck, the frenzying D-Class seemed to miss D-87465, who had laid down on the ground amongst the other bodies and was playing dead. An armed response team soon entered the experimentation cell and put down the rampaging D-Class, sparing D-87465. He was next submitted to a test with SCP-075, a creature that resembles a large snail with a muscular foot shaped like a six-fingered clawed hand. SCP-075 is much heavier than its small size makes it seem like it should, weighing approximately 860 kilograms. Despite this, it is able to move at an extremely high speed, quickly leaping towards anyone who comes near it and spraying them with a deadly corrosive liquid. D-87465 was placed in a cell with SCP-075 as part of a test to measure its speed and reaction time. But despite SCP-075 having immediately killed all other prior D-classes during tests, D-87465 somehow managed to keep avoiding its leaping attacks. He was always able to guess which direction to move in order to dodge the deadly snail, like a soccer goalie who always picks the right way to dive to stop penalty kicks. Having now survived not one, but two experiments that exposed him to Keter-class anomalies, researchers needed to find out if D-87465 was himself anomalous or simply a statistical anomaly. In order to test this, the D-Class was placed in the containment cell of SCP-082, better known to most as Fernand the Cannibal, a grotesquely huge humanoid with ogre-like features who often dresses like a Victorian-era aristocrat and will regale his guests with outlandish stories before inevitably eating them. But there was something different about D-87465. After a full month of survival in 082's cell, a length of time that had resulted in all the previous test subjects being consumed, SCP researchers suspected that this D-Class's incredible ability to survive was much more than dumb luck. But they needed to test him even more to see if his powers extended beyond just the ability to survive. D-87465 was removed from regular D-Class duties, and researchers began performing various tests on him, watching as he flipped a coin 50 times in a row, with it coming up heads every single time. Similar results occurred when they had him roll pairs of dice that would always total up to 7, or when they had him pick random cards out of a deck, and he was able to pull all 13 hearts in a row. Foundation researchers were now convinced that this man was more than just lucky. He seemed to possess the ability to create an unnatural effect on probability, though researchers suspected that he was generating this effect without being aware of it. At this point, D-87465 was reclassified and given a new designation, SCP-181. Further testing confirmed that SCP-181 is able to affect causal probability and that it really does occur through no action of his own. However, there's more to SCP-181 than simply being lucky, as researchers soon found out. In an audit of death and injury rates at Bioresearch Area 12, where SCP-181 is contained, it was discovered that both had increased dramatically in the time since he was brought there. It seems that SCP-181 doesn't simply create his own good luck. He, in some ways, saps it from others simply by being present. It now appears that every lucky moment he experiences results in the opposite happening to someone else. For every 7 he rolls on a pair of dice, someone else gets snake eyes. And for every death-defying escape he makes, someone else must die. There's no telling how far his ability might scale. Could he survive a nuclear blast? And if he did, what would be the result in order to even out the odds, so to speak? In light of these new discoveries, SCP-181 was removed from his low-level containment cell where he was allowed to occasionally interact with D-Class personnel for entertainment purposes, and was moved to Site-27, where he was placed in solitary confinement and classified as safe. All interactions with staff are now limited to the bare minimum in order to ensure his survival and security, without risking any events that might result in him getting lucky. The young woman looked again at her map, turning it this way and that, trying to figure out which way she should be going. "Excuse me, sir?" she calls out to a passing man, but he pays her no mind. A woman walks past and stops when the woman tries her hand at the local language. "Bud, Laska?" Da? The woman asks her. Vai, rozmovlejete, angliskoju? Yet, the woman replies before continuing on her way. The young woman feels that this is hopeless. Outside of a few phrases like hello, goodbye, and where is the bathroom, her local language skills are sorely lacking. She's still at the beginning of her grand trip of Europe that saw her starting on the eastern side of the continent with the plan to travel westward and finish her journey in Paris. She's traveled a bit before, but here in this Ukrainian city, she's realizing that she may be out of her comfort zone. This trip is very important to her, though. After her parents were killed in a car wreck, she was paralyzed with grief and barely left her room for months. She decided that she needed to get away and give herself a clean break from everything back home, and so she decided to do what her parents had done when they were her age and backpack across Europe. All of the pictures from their trip showed the two of them together, smiling and happy in front of great landmarks. But here she was, alone, scared, and unable to even find her hostel. "Sir, can you help me?" she cries to another passing man, waving her map towards him. But he too ignores her pleas. The young woman zips up her jacket. It's getting late, and the setting of the sun is accompanied by a cold breeze. She looks up and down the city street, and even though there are still plenty of people around, it feels as though all she can see are unfriendly faces. Her face lights up when she spots something, though. It's a police officer. He'll be able to help her. The young woman runs towards the police officer who is standing near the side of the road, or at least she thinks he must be a police officer. His gray uniform looks a little old-fashioned, but it's neat and well-fitting, and he's holding what appears to be a baton used for directing traffic. The young woman approaches the officer, but his back is to her as he gazes out towards the street. Unsure of what else to do, she reaches out with some hesitancy and taps the man on the shoulder, causing him to wheel around to face her. He stares at her without speaking. Do you speak English?" the young woman asks. "Yes, little," he responds in a thick Ukrainian accent. "Oh, thank goodness. You have to help me, please. I'm completely lost and I don't know what to do." As people continue to walk past her without giving any notice, she goes on to explain that after arriving in the northeastern Ukrainian city, she took what she thought would be the right bus, but ended up going in the completely wrong direction. Now she has no idea where she is, and is worried she won't make it to her hostel before night falls. "Where is your hostel?" the policeman asks. "Somewhere called the..." She looks down at the words scribbled on the margins of her map. The studentskaya?" she tells him. Yes, the police officer says. There are many hostels there, including some specifically for foreign visitors and students. She has been very unlucky, though, since it was actually near the metro station she first arrived at. He can help her get there, though. There is a bus that will take her straight there, and the stop is only a few blocks away. He can walk with her there if she likes. The young woman accepts his kind offer, and the two start heading down the sidewalk together. As they walk, he asks what she is doing in their city, and she explains how she just needed to get away and see the world. She's unsure why, but she feels like she can confide in this policeman, and she begins to explain what happened to her parents, how alone she felt at home, and how this trip is meant to be a life reset, but so far, it's off to a terrible start. "We have phrase," he tells her. "Sigda może być тоже." "What does that mean?" she asks. "It can always get worse. This way." The police officer points towards an alleyway and starts walking towards it. He can tell the young woman is feeling apprehensive about entering the dark space between the buildings, and he assures her that it is a shortcut. There's nothing to be afraid of. The two walk into the alley together. The young woman again starts telling him about her life back in the United States, what she plans to do when she gets back, how she hopes the trip will be a turning point for her. As she talks, she fails to notice that the police officer has begun to slow. She does notice, though, that the shadow of the police officer has suddenly started to stretch out on the ground in front of her. She stops and watches as the shadow keeps moving, growing larger and larger. It stretches and lengthens, even as hers stays the same. She also realizes that the sound of the policeman's footsteps have also stopped. She slowly turns to see it standing in the place where the police officer should be. A grotesque, horrible sight. A massively tall creature with long, disgusting limbs. She's too scared to scream as she continues looking up its gigantic body before finally looking at its face, or what's left of it. Half of its jaw hangs unhinged, as if it has been torn from its joint, and it has no ears or nose. She trembles in fear as she wonders if whatever this thing is can see her, since it also has no eyes. The last thing she sees before she turns to run is the creature lifting up one of its arms, where its hand has been replaced by a black and white metal rod that it brings down with terrifying speed and crushes her skull. Привit! Today's file exploration has taken us to Ukraine, though the anomaly known as SCP-1366-RU has been known to appear in a number of other countries as well. SCP-1366-RU is a humanoid creature that, from what the SCP Foundation has been able to observe, appears to be sapient and resembles a police officer, or militia, from the 1970s Soviet Union. It wears a long, dark gray coat, tall black leather boots, and a cap, and holds a black and white baton reminiscent of the type used by police officers in Russia and many Eastern European countries to direct traffic. When an individual begins interacting with SCP-1366-RU, they will find that they feel as if they are talking to a regular police officer and having a completely normal conversation. It is capable of exerting a mental influence over the person speaking with them, allowing it to easily mislead and deceive them, which explains why they ignore the fact that the officer is wearing a uniform that is several decades out of date. Those who pass by will not seem to notice the anachronistic clothing either, and they will pay no mind to what is happening. This same effect extends to those viewing SCP-1366-RU on a live feed, and it is only when recordings are viewed that its true form is revealed. SCP-1366-RU's actual appearance is that of a mummified human corpse, though it is taller than any human at over 5 meters in height, with arms and legs that are disproportionately long, with the legs alone making up 2/3 of its total height. SCP-1366-RU is also extremely skinny, even for a desiccated cadaver, and its limbs and head look as though they are nothing more than brown, dry skin stretched directly over bones, with no muscle at all underneath. Its left hand appears to be missing, and in its place, the creature has a black and white rod fused directly into its arm. 1366-RU's face appears as though it has suffered tremendous injuries. Its eyes, nose, and ears all look as if they have been removed from its face, and the left half of its lower jaw hangs freely in its joint, as though it were torn away. Despite this damage to its face, it is still quite capable of speech, at least when people are perceiving it in its human form. It's currently unknown why, but SCP-1366-RU appears to be primarily interested in kidnapping and killing people who are in countries that once belonged to the former Soviet Union. So far, there has been no commonalities between the victims except for one thing: all of their parents were dead at the time of their abduction. Once the Foundation realized this uniting factor, they were able to create a scenario in which the anomaly appeared, though so far, this has only been successful one time. Foundation researchers located a member of Class D personnel who was an orphan, D-1935, and equipped them with a radio headset, a video camera, and a microphone, and instructed them to walk the streets of a city located in a country which was once part of the USSR. The D-Class was observed on location by members of MTF-810, nicknamed See No Evil, and they watched as D-1935 suddenly stopped on the sidewalk. He was approached by a police officer with an out-of-date uniform who saluted the D-Class with his right hand. ETA 10 appeared to not see the police officer and reminded the D-Class to stay sharp and continue looking for 1366-RU. The police officer spoke to the D-Class, though only in mumbled, broken words, as if something had rendered him unable to speak. The recording equipment captured the D-Class seeming to have a one-sided conversation with the policeman, where he insisted that he wasn't lost, and that he was actually out walking with his mother. Or rather, he thought he was out with his mother. It seemed to the D-Class that she had just left, and he requested the police officer's help in finding her again. The officer then took the D-Class's hand and began leading him away, eventually taking him into a dark alley. All the while, ETA 10 seemed completely oblivious to what was going on. They didn't even realize that D-1935 had left until the two disappeared into the alleyway. They began searching the area, but they were unable to locate the D-Class anywhere. It was as if he had been there one moment and then simply disappeared. Luckily, D-1935 had also been equipped with a GPS tracking beacon, but when ETA 10 looked at their locator, they were convinced something was wrong, since it showed that the D-Class was now over 5,000 kilometers away. A nearby containment team was sent to the location being broadcast from D-1935's tracker, and they arrived roughly 2 hours after his disappearance. When they got to the location, they discovered that it was coming from a very strange place: a cemetery. The team cautiously entered the cemetery and began making their way in the direction of the beacon, unaware of what they would find. When the GPS locator finally signaled that they were in the correct position, they realized that they were standing directly over a grave. Specifically, a grave belonging to the mother of D-1935, who had been dead for over 50 years. There was no question, though, this was the location the beacon was broadcasting from, and after receiving permission from the Foundation, the containment team began to dig. When the coffin was finally revealed, the team readied their weapons, unsure of what they might find inside. But when they opened its lid, they saw that their guns weren't necessary. All that was found within was the mummified body of a woman. That and the body of D-1935, who was curled up in the fetal position, tightly hugging the remains of his mother. Following this event, the parents of other suspected SCP-1366-RU victims were exhumed as well, and in each case, the missing person's body was found inside, alongside their deceased mother or father. SCP-1366-RU, which has been given the nickname Uncle Styopa, a play on a popular Russian children's character who is an extremely tall policeman, has so far eluded all containment attempts, and it has been classified as Euclid. Disappearances of those without living parents in former Soviet Union countries should be investigated to determine the involvement of SCP-1366-RU. Any recording devices in the area where they disappeared must be checked, and should they contain any images of SCP-1366-RU's true form, then they are to be immediately confiscated and destroyed.
A young woman is spending the morning in town, completing a few errands she's been meaning to get to for a while. She picks up a few items from the supermarket, gets the cracked screen on her smartphone repaired, and decides to treat herself to a Danish from a local bakery. It's a relatively idyllic Tuesday, until she turns the corner into a narrow side street and sees them. It can often be a little disconcerting to suddenly find yourself staring at a crowd that is gathered for seemingly no reason, but something about this one makes her particularly nervous, and she quickly realizes why. Each person in the tightly packed together group is grinning, as if they are all in on a particularly cruel joke about her. At face value, they all seem to be very different people, a collage of ages, races, genders, in different clothes with different styles, and yet they're all walking with perfect synchronicity, one perfectly timed footfall at a time. This is enough to seriously creep her out. Whatever this strange group of people is doing, she wants no part of it. Instead, she turns and heads in the opposite direction, fast walking and stealing discreet but frequent glances over her shoulder. She can't help but notice, even when the crowd exits the small side street, that they remain huddled together, like security guards packed tight around some invisible VIP. And even worse, they seem to be following her trajectory, getting faster, getting closer, still perfectly in sync with one another. How are all these people gaining so fast? She thinks to herself. When she's around a corner and out of sight, she does the sensible thing and breaks into a sprint, eager to put some distance between herself and them. Even though they haven't shown any signs of overt aggression, she can tell on some visceral level that they mean her great harm. She knows if ever they get close enough, within grasping distance, something terrible will happen. She's soon back at her home and locks herself in, bolting the door behind her. She breathes a sigh, but she's not relieved, not really. Maybe she's paranoid, but she feels like she isn't out of the woods just yet. Those eerie smiles, those perfect footsteps, she can't get them out of her mind. She slips into her kitchen and slides a knife out of the block. She tells herself that doing this is a little crazy, but having some kind of weapon in hand makes her feel at least a little bit safer. But whatever the feelings of comfort the knife gives her are shattered when she hears the doorbell ring. She hadn't ordered anything. She wasn't expecting anyone. Who could that be? She hides the knife behind her back and makes her way towards the door. Ding dong, it rings again. Whoever is on the other side is getting impatient. She opens the door slightly, but leaves the chain in place. There's a smiling man in a business suit on the other side. She's racking her brain, trying to remember. Is he one of the people from the crowd? Or is she just imagining things because she's freaked out? She can't tell anymore. She can feel her palm getting sweaty around the knife's handle. The man at the door clears his throat and says, "Excuse me, ma'am, I won't take up too much of your time, but I wanted to ask, have you heard the good word?" She shakes her head and tells the stranger that she isn't interested in hearing his pitch, but he just keeps smiling and presses on. Do you ever feel lonely, dissatisfied, unfulfilled? Don't you ever wish that you could become a part of something bigger than yourself? It'd be a real weight off your shoulders. She's starting to run out of polite ways to deny him when she hears a faint tapping against the nearby glass. The young woman turns her head and looks into her living room. There's a smiling woman standing at the window, rapping on the glass with her knuckles, grinning. The chill sets in immediately. She recognizes that face with absolute certainty. It's one of the people from the crowd, and now she knows for sure that the man at the door is too. But when she turns back to him,
All she sees is his hand reaching through the gap in the door for her. She screams and backs away, instinctively slashing the knife at him. 2 fingers fall to the floor, but there's no blood, just thick, flesh-colored pus dripping from the 2 stumps. The hand doesn't even flinch. It keeps reaching, and soon, the gap in the door is crowded with the faces of even more grinning human figures. She turns and runs as the sheer collected momentum of the crowd forces open the door. They spill into the hallway, tumbling over each other, but still smiling. She notices something trailing out of their clothes, long, sinewy ropes that look like they're made of living flesh, wriggling and pumping with each passing second. This whole situation seems to just be getting worse and worse. Thinking quickly, she decides to flee up the stairs. If she gets to her bedroom fast enough, she can lock her door from the inside, open the window, and climb down the trellis into the yard before they can break in. In that moment, it seems like the best course of action, but only because she has no idea just how quickly the crowd can close the distance. In an instant, the crowd is up onto the stairs and following her, extending their grasping hands in unison. Who are these people? Why are they doing this? The questions that flood her mind are soon forced out by the shock of the grinning stranger in the business suit, pulling her into a powerful bear hug. He squeezes hard, and she can feel it in her muscles and bones. She wriggles for her life, but she can't resist his strength. The rest of the crowd reaches for her. She spots those awful fleshy cords again, emerging from the backs of all these terrifying strangers. And now she sees what they're all leading back to, a giant, formless blob of flesh, like some corrupted unknown organ, a huge, monstrous tumor. It pulses and throbs. Just looking at it makes her want to be sick, and she can feel the most horrible energy coming off of it. Whatever this thing is, it wants her. It's reaching for her. Fight or flight kicks in, and this time flight isn't an option. The stranger in the suit has a good grip on her, in spite of his missing fingers, but she's still got the knife. She can see the cord trailing from his back into the giant flesh blob, and with one decisive strike, she severs it with the kitchen knife. Immediately, the man in the suit lets go of her. Both ends of the cord flop down, spraying more of the flesh-colored pus, but the effect on the man himself is even more drastic. He flails around, making the most horrible guttural gurgling noises she's ever heard. He heaves and vomits out gallons of the pus. It sprays from his eyes and nose like a fire hose. It oozes down and out of his pant legs. His body deflates like a punctured balloon as the awful substance cascades out of him, until all that's left is a wet, vacant sack of skin and clothes, quivering on the floor. But she doesn't have time to dwell on the horrors she's just witnessed. She needs to get out of here, now. She turns and continues running up the stairs as the crowd regroups and begins chasing her. She can hear their perfectly synchronized footsteps sloshing through the liquids of their fallen member. They've barely even slowed down. She keeps running. She just needs to keep running. A number of hands close around her body. Several of them clamp around her wrist, squeezing tight until the knife falls from her hand and clatters to the ground. They've learned already. The crowd rises up and closes around her. No matter how hard she struggles, they won't budge. They just keep huddling in. She can hear the giant pulsing mass of flesh closing in behind her. She feels one of those long, fleshy cords slithering up her back, its fibrous strands easing their way into her flesh until the connection is made. Her eyes roll up into her head as it pumps the fluid into her body, melting away everything inside and congealing it into the same nightmarish slop that she'd just seen splattering out of the man in the business suit moments ago. Little by little, everything that was once her is hollowed out, filled in, and painted over. Once the transformation is complete, she smiles, just like all the others. But she's not she anymore. She's just another part of it, its newest addition, a replacement for the man in the suit. The crowd leaves shortly after, keeping perfect step, looking for some new friends. At some point, everyone has felt the desire to fit in, but one anomaly takes the desire to join the throng to its ultimate extreme. This is SCP-428, also known as The Crowd. In its purest state, SCP-428 is an amorphous mass of flesh connected to a number of human hosts with organic tendrils, similar to umbilical cords. The central mass is obscured by its multiple human hosts, numbering 14 at the present moment, and it is an extremely dangerous entity. Once an individual is assimilated into its mass, they are to be considered lost. Upon assimilation, all of the victim's complex internal structures, bones, musculature, organs, nervous system, are instead replaced by material similar in composition to the amorphous mass that controls them. All that remains is their skin and vague shape, being piloted by the SCP-428 hub. When not actively seeking new victims to assimilate, SCP-428 enters a dormant state, its assimilated victims standing in a circle around the hub, audibly mumbling to one another and swaying gently. SCP-428 and its crowd will enter a hostile state if anyone travels within 2 meters of it. With surprising speed and ferocity, members of the crowd will try to mob the unfortunate victim in a sudden ambush, bringing them into the proximity of the hub. If they remain in this state for over 10 seconds, a cord will attach to their body and their vital systems will be replaced, and they will be assimilated into the crowd, just like the other victims of SCP-428 were before them. If, however, the victim somehow manages to escape before the process is complete, this will not be the end of their ordeal. Should someone evade its attention, SCP-428 and the crowd will enter a period of active hunting behavior to seek out the escaping victim. Failing that, they will try to assimilate any human wandering into their vicinity. There is no safe way to approach SCP-428 or any of its members under any circumstances. To do so is to court a fate worse than death. When a victim is assimilated, SCP-428 and the crowd will return to a dormant state until another victim presents itself. Foundation studies have determined that SCP-428 seeks to add at least one person to its crowd every month, and if a person is not provided, then it will engage in hunting behavior, putting everyone in the area in grave danger. SCP-428 isn't controlling a gaggle of mindless zombies, though. It is an extremely intelligent hive mind, made all the more frightening by the fact that it absorbs the knowledge, memories, and skills of each of its victims, and can reapply them through any of the others. Because of this, it appears to have incredibly adept knowledge of the human mind, and will happily resort to using tactics of psychological manipulation to gain an advantage. Despite being a large crowd, tests have shown that SCP-428 and its assimilated victims can move terrifyingly fast. This is because, due to the very nature of the perfectly attuned hive mind, they can walk or run in perfect synchronicity. To best understand this, picture a centipede skittering at great speed across a wall. So many legs, but all sharing a perfectly coordinated nervous system, working together to move the creature with military precision. Even individually, each member of the crowd is a formidable foe. Once they become part of SCP-428, they exhibit greatly increased strength. They show no signs of feeling pain, and also have the ability to quickly heal any injuries. Wounds also do not seem to impede function whatsoever. A member of the crowd getting shot in the leg won't slow it down in the slightest. However, while this creature is incredibly intelligent and dangerous, the same can be said for the SCP Foundation, and in the time since they discovered it, they have ascertained a few weaknesses, even though some of this knowledge came at a heavy cost. Though members of the crowd appear significantly resistant to damage, the SCP-428 hub itself appears to be vulnerable to attack and more than capable of feeling pain. If the hub is damaged in a manner that would cause pain, every member of the crowd is able to feel it, often collapsing and writhing around in agony. When the creature collects itself, it will retreat, guarded by its human shields. The Foundation has used this method to corral the creature back into containment during breaches, with the controlled applications of fire or electricity being favorite methods of Foundation security forces. Severing the connection between a member of the crowd and the central hub is also a surefire way to weaken the overall ability of SCP-428. A severed crowd member will immediately collapse, the SCP-428 material inside it liquefying and excreting from every orifice. This may intensify SCP-428's drive to discover a new victim, but it can also be used as a method of population control for the crowd itself. There has been one major incident concerning SCP-428 since its containment at the SCP Foundation, and it acted as a painful reminder to all staff that one should never underestimate the abilities of the anomalies they contain. Evidently, one of the people assimilated by SCP-428 in the past was skilled in the art of lockpicking, as SCP-428 had absorbed this skill. It took apart one of its members' belts and used the pieces to pick the lock of its containment chamber from the inside. It then positioned one of its female victims, crouching just outside the door, the cord slithering through the crack in the door behind her. She fell to her knees and began to weep loudly, attracting the attention of a nearby researcher. Naturally, when you hear a distressed person crying, it's human instinct to go investigate and help, and this particular researcher hadn't been briefed on the nature and abilities of SCP-428, which left him completely unprepared for the horrifying fate that awaited him. As he leaned in to comfort the crying woman, the rest of the crowd immediately emerged from the containment chamber's door, mobbing him. One forced its hand over his mouth, stifling his frightened scream as he was pulled in and quickly assimilated. While SCP-428 could pick locks, absorbing a member of SCP Foundation staff, both giving it access to the Foundation site layouts and inner workings, as well as a presentable frontman to assuage suspicion, was like getting its fleshy tendrils on a kind of master key. SCP-428 and its crowd, with the assimilated researcher at the head, progressed through the building, avoiding key security checkpoints and absorbing several other researchers and guards along the way. This was a particularly frightening development, as it allowed SCP-428 to further expand both its knowledge of the SCP Foundation and its skills in everything from science to armed and hand-to-hand combat. With every new person it took in, it grew significantly stronger and more dangerous to Foundation personnel. Thankfully, it drew the right kind of attention before it had a chance to escape the containment site proper. A mobile task force was dispatched to contain SCP-428 and the crowd and force it back into its containment chamber. However, being an extremely persistent creature, this minor setback didn't do anything to quell its desire to escape. Given that several members of its crowd were now ex-Foundation staff members, it tried to leverage this in order to manipulate the people guarding its chamber. This became such a problem that a researcher appended a note to its file, reading, "People, these casualties are gone. They are SCP-428 now. No matter what it might say or do, they are not your work colleagues nor your friends anymore. Remember this, it may save your life." SCP-428 and its crowd is currently contained in a 5 meter by 5 meter by 5 meter cell, with walls electrified to 30,000 volts to discourage attempts by members of the crowd to break or climb them. The cell is accessed via an airlock, and entry is restricted to Level 3 researchers and below, while escorted by 2 armed guards in order to eliminate the risk of SCP-428 absorbing a valuable asset to the SCP Foundation and coming into possession of truly catastrophic knowledge and skills as a result. Just imagine the disastrous results if, say, a member of the O5 Council were suddenly a part of SCP-428. Researchers are to remain a minimum of 2 meters away at all times, and it is mandatory for at least 2 armed guards to stay posted at the chamber's entrance at all times. SCP-428 is to be given 1 member of D-Class personnel to assimilate every single month in order to prevent it from engaging in hunting behavior. Due to SCP-428's frightening ability to absorb memories, skills, and intelligence, all D-classes given to 428 are screened for low intelligence and a lack of valuable skills to ensure that the anomaly isn't being given any new aces up its sleeves. However, continually giving SCP-428 new victims is going to increase its overall size and thus necessitate gradual containment upgrades. The possibility of permanently neutralizing SCP-428 is being explored, but in the meantime, it has been given the Euclid Object Class because of its intelligence, skills, and unpredictability. While the SCP Foundation is all about sacrificing the individual for the greater good, this is one frightening collective that they couldn't endorse becoming a part of.
A climber struggles on the side of the mountain. He's so close to the summit of Mount Everest that he can taste it. He just needs to triumph over this last difficult section, and he will have fulfilled his lifetime dream of standing at the top of the world. He needs to hurry, though. At this altitude, the air is so thin and the temperature is so cold that your body is slowly dying. There's a reason this topmost section of the mountain is known as the Death Zone. He glances down behind him and spots something. Is that another climber? That's strange, he thinks. He was at the very back of his group, and there shouldn't have been anyone else coming up behind him. It must be a solo climber. The soloist doesn't look to be moving, though. He's just staring at him, and the climber can't seem to take his eyes off him. Suddenly, the climber starts feeling odd. He begins to feel warm and comfortable. The aches and pains of the long journey melt away. He decides to sit down on a small ledge and relax. He watches as the solo climber comes towards him. He must be a professional with the way he effortlessly moves up the mountain. He watches him make great time, getting closer and closer. He loses sight as the solo climber reaches the same difficult section he had been struggling with. He imagines the solo climber will soon zip past him on his way to the summit. But just then, the soloist pops up right in front of him. He clasps his hands on the climber's shoulders and pulls him close, staring into his eyes with those dark, black goggles. They feel like they're pulling him into their depths, and there's nothing he can do to resist it. The climber tries to scream, but all that comes out of his mouth is silence. Hi, I'm Dr. Bob, and this is SCP-1529, also known as King of the Mountain. But first, a quick personal request from me.
I need your help to spread the word about the lesser-known anomalies in the SCP Foundation's archives. The best thing you can do to help me is subscribe, turn on notifications, and then go tell your friends to do the same. This is a huge help and will let me bring you more and more SCP videos. Now, back to our file. SCP-1529 is an entity with a humanoid appearance that resides near the summit of Mount Everest in Nepal. It is only found above 8,000 meters, which places it in the part of the mountain referred to as the Death Zone, where oxygen levels are too low to support human life for any extended period of time. It is roughly equivalent to an average human male in height and weight, and its outer appearance resembles normal mountaineering clothes, with a heavy parka, pants, and boots that are all white in color. Its face is completely obscured by a large hood, with the only visible detail being a pair of large, dark goggles. SCP-1529 has never been seen wearing any other outfit, and in fact, it is unknown whether these are articles of clothing at all, or if they are actually a part of its body. The SCP Foundation first became aware of an anomalous entity lurking near the top of Mount Everest in the 1970s, when climbing expeditions to the summit became more commonplace among professional and amateur mountaineers alike. Rumors began to spread and told of a monster that was killing unfortunate climbers. In 1999, the body of George Mallory, who is believed to be the first person to reach the top of Mount Everest, was located, and photographic film found on his body was developed. From those pictures, it is now known that SCP-1529 was present at least as early as his 1924 expedition. When sufficient daylight and a lack of cloud cover allows observation of the peak by telescope, SCP-1529 can be seen sitting or lying on the mountain, apparently motionless in an inactive state. These motionless periods have been seen to last anywhere from 17 minutes to as long as 8 months. When active, though, it can be seen summiting and descending the upper portion of the mountain, though it never uses any climbing tools and will ignore established climbing ropes and ladders that have been installed by other climbers. It has also been observed easily traversing portions of the mountain that are considered too difficult or altogether impossible by experienced climbers. Additionally, SCP-1529 is not impacted by the freezing temperatures, extreme wind speeds, or low oxygen levels at the top of the mountain, and it has never once been seen to stumble, fall, or even lose its grip. It is unknown what prompts SCP-1529 to become active or enter a resting inactive phase, nor has there been any established correlation of these phases to weather, time of year, or traffic on the mountain. Its active periods have been observed to last between mere hours to several days, but the exact amount is hard to know for sure. Nighttime observation of 1529 has so far been impossible, even with thermal imaging cameras, since it produces no heat, with its temperatures being the same as that of the surrounding environment. When in its active phase, if a human climber passes the 8,000-meter mark, then SCP-1529 will begin to make its way towards them, putting itself in the path between the climber and either the summit if they are ascending, or their camp if they are descending. It seems to prefer to go after solo climbers, or those that are significantly ahead or behind their climbing group, but it has been observed targeting climbers in a group when a solo opportunity is not available. Once SCP-1529 is within eyesight of its targeted climber, it will attempt to gain their attention and then lock eyes with them, which produces a hypnotic effect. The climber will find that they are unable to break eye contact with SCP-1529, and will then begin to experience feelings of warmth and euphoria, similar to the effects of hypothermia and hypoxia, also known as altitude sickness. The victim will feel the overwhelming desire to sit down where they are, and once they stop moving, SCP-1529 will quickly close the distance between them. Once SCP-1529 reaches the victim, death is almost a certainty. An examination of bodies has shown the cause to be from hypothermia. Strangely, it's been observed that victims seem to succumb within just 1 to 2 hours after having first made eye contact with SCP-1529, a period of time much shorter than usual for climbers trapped on the summit of Everest. After death, the victims' bodies experience an accelerated rate of decay, and after mere hours or days, the bodies become rotted and mummified at a level comparable to bodies that have been exposed to the wind and cold of the mountain for decades. Many of the over 200 deaths on Mount Everest have been attributed to SCP-1529, and the rare survivor of an encounter is almost always due to the intervention of another mountaineer, who was able to offer assistance to the entranced climber before SCP-1529 was able to reach them. There have been several notable reports from survivors of interactions with SCP-1529. One, known as Incident 1529-1, is also the only documented instance of SCP-1529 descending below the 8,000-meter mark. During the incident, the entity entered Camp 5, located on the northern approach of the mountain at 7,775 meters, which resulted in multiple deaths, including 2 Foundation personnel who were operating the monitoring posts. One climber, who had initially believed to have been killed in the incident, was discovered to still be alive 2 days later when Foundation personnel were conducting investigations at the camp. He was safely removed from the mountain, though he required the amputation of several frostbitten fingers and toes. During an interview with a Foundation agent, they described spotting SCP-1529 just 10 minutes after leaving the summit of the mountain. After locking eyes with the entity, they began to feel happy, comfortable, and relieved, like they were back at home next to a warm fire. But then suddenly the warmth was gone, and they experienced a sensation of cold more powerful than anything they had felt before. They were stuck, and could only watch as 1529 made its way towards them. When it finally reached them, it placed its hands on their shoulders and pulled them up into its face so that they were staring right into its black goggles. Images began to appear in the dark depths of the goggles. People warm and happy, sitting next to fires, in hot baths, or sunning on a beach. They tried to resist the strange pull of the creature with all of their might. They then heard something in their mind, a question from SCP-1529. It asked, "You would refuse my gift?" The stranded climber struggled to answer, using all of their willpower and strength to move their lips and whisper a single word. Yes. SCP-1529 responded by showing more images of people, but this time, they were bodies lying dead in the snow. Countless victims trapped on Mount Everest forever. SCP-1529 made them watch their deaths play out in long, drawn-out detail, a witness to every second of their demise. The climber was sure they would soon join them, but then they found something deep inside of them, a spark of life, a will to resist. They clenched their fist, and with their final ounce of strength, they punched SCP-1529. The goggles appeared to crack, and the next thing the climber knew, they were woken up by the Foundation recovery team. Following this encounter, the climber never attempted to summit another mountain. When they eventually passed away some years later, an autopsy revealed that their cause of death was consistent with extreme hypothermia, frostbite, and cerebral edema, despite not having been in a cold environment or above 500 meters in altitude in the previous 12 months. SCP-1529 has been classified as Euclid and is to be kept under telescope and satellite surveillance whenever possible, though telescope observation should make use of a delayed video feed, as observers have reported seeing SCP-1529 appearing to stare back at them, and reported feeling symptoms consistent with an encounter, including hypothermia and frostbite. The Foundation maintains communication with civilian mountaineering expeditions to prevent summiting attempts when SCP-1529 is active. The bodies of any victims are to be removed from the mountain if possible for autopsy, with their deaths being officially classified as having been from natural causes related to altitude sickness and hypothermia. Any survivors of encounters with SCP-1529 are to be debriefed and administered amnestics. Mobile Task Force Psi-29029, also known as Alpine Echo, is to remain on standby at all times at a permanent monitoring station, with on-duty members remaining in a pressurized environment acclimatized to 7,900 meters above sea level, allowing them to quickly deploy via helicopter if need be. Finally, and most troubling, is that aerial surveillance of another mountain has revealed an individual similar in appearance to SCP-1529. The location remains classified, and the local government has prohibited climbing on the peak, so threats to humanity are minimal at this time. But the Foundation will continue to monitor it and other mountains for anomalous activity.
A man opens his mouth to bite a hot dog and suddenly freezes. His eyes widen, and the hot dog drops from his hand, falling to the ground. Ahead, a stampede of people is running toward him, screaming, crying out for help. Behind them, a man walks at an ordinary, casual pace, but something is off. His eyes have a glazed, unfocused look to them, and he keeps shoveling random items into his open mouth, swallowing them down. He eats a clipboard and pen, a discarded shoe, and as the first man watches in horror, the very hungry man grabs the ankle of a fallen member of the crowd and pulls him into his mouth, devouring him. The first man turns to run for his life, only to be knocked to the ground by the rest of the crowd, trying to escape. He struggles to climb back to his feet, and a hand reaches out to take his. When he makes it to his feet, he looks up and sees the hungry man pulling him in. mouth stretching open wide. The sky is a perfect, cloudless blue. The air is warm from the unbroken sunlight, but cooled to the perfect temperature by a gentle breeze. And there is a sense of electricity, excitement, and competition in the air. Throngs of people have gathered together in a makeshift arena, piled into plastic chairs and swarming around concession stands, all training their eyes on the arena's center. What are they here for? Some sort of Olympic Games? A baseball tournament? A horse race? No, it's something greater, something meatier. It is the annual Midsummer Hot Dog Eating Contest, and locals and tourists alike are coming together to see just who can cram the most pork or beef hot dogs and buns down their gullets in front of a roaring crowd. The announcer makes his way to the front of the arena, standing with his arms wide in front of the long table behind him. As he calls out the names of this year's contestants, they file in, each taking his place behind the table. There is the previous year's champion, a burly man with a bushy beard and twinkling eyes, and there is this year's surprise competitor, a skinny 19-year-old college student with a hungry grin. Then there are the lesser-known contestants, a local father who signed up after making a joke with his daughter, an uncle who scrawled his name on the sign-up sheet after a few too many drinks, a recently retired man checking off another item on his golden years bucket list. All have come to the event today with full hearts and empty stomachs, ready to see who the year's victor will be. The announcer riles up the crowd, encouraging them to cheer as loudly as possible to spur on their chosen competitor. All the while, staff are carrying out trays piled high with hot dogs, more hot dogs than most people see in a year, except for the people who just really, really love hot dogs. Each contestant receives a tray of hot dogs, a bucket of water, and an additional empty bucket, just in case, well, you get the idea. With the supplies and competitors all in place, it is time to begin the countdown. The announcer holds up his favorite air horn and calls out,
3, 2, 1, eat!
At the sound of the air horn's blast, the men leap into action, seizing hot dogs from plates and each engaging in their unique competitive eating technique. The previous year's champion employs the method of famous hot dog eating champion Joey Chestnut, dunking his entire hot dog sloppily into his water, then swallowing it as quickly as possible. The new challenger, on the other hand, employs the Solomon method, named for King Solomon. Much like the fabled king suggested doing with a stolen infant, eaters using the Solomon method break the focus of their feasting in half before polishing it off. One of the more casual competitors attempts a divide-and-conquer technique, eating first the dog itself, and then the bun. Others employ no specific technique at all, attempting to devour the stack of hot dogs before them, using the same classic eating style they might employ at a family barbecue. This is a grave mistake. One by one, the less prepared competitors drop out, spitting into their buckets, wiping meat sweats from their foreheads, waddling out of the arena while groaning and holding their aching stomachs. Soon, only the two frontrunners remain. But what's this? A challenger approaches. An unassuming black man, clad in a shirt and dress pants, rushes into the arena, his face a mask of single-minded determination, and begins seizing the discarded hot dogs off the table, gobbling them up as fast as he can. The announcer and the rest of the audience watch in stunned disbelief. This is unprecedented, and as exciting as it is, definitely against the rules. This man is not a registered competitor, and he certainly can't join the contest in the champion stretch. Unsure of what else to do, the announcer beckons to the staff on the sidelines, ushering them back toward the table to clear the food and escort this surprise drop-in out of the arena. The audience watches with rapt attention as the staff members attempt to remove the stranger from his place at the table. He shakes his head violently, refusing to go, and snatches the hot dogs away from them, even as they try to clear the trays away. All the while, the remaining competitors standing are attempting to stay the course and finish strong in spite of the interruption. The new, younger man collapses, slumping down onto the table in a hot dog-induced stupor. He has tapped out. The victor is the previous year's champion, with a staggering ultimate tally of 38 hot dogs. As 4 staff members work together to wrestle the stranger out of the arena, the champion steps forward to receive his trophy. The crowd roars as he holds up his arms, grinning ear to ear and basking in yet another win. The announcer can still see the staff struggling with the stranger out of the corner of his eye, but this crowd wants to see their champion crowned, and the show must go on. So he grabs the Hot Dog King sash, the crown made from gold-plated, hot dogs, and even the massive gold trophy. He crowns the winner, placing the sash over his shoulders. Then, as the music swells triumphantly, courtesy of the local high school marching band, the announcer holds up the trophy, sunlight glinting off its shiny surface. It represents so many things: achievement, celebration, the ability to eat just so much meat and not get sick, and now it is time for it to be awarded to the man who earned it. The announcer stretches his arms, handing over the trophy to the contest winner, when all of a sudden, another hand grabs hold of its handle, ripping it from the announcer's grasp. The stranger has returned, somehow freeing himself from the multiple security guards who escorted him away, and he has taken the trophy for himself. But he isn't just attempting to crown himself the hot dog king. No, this is not a simple coup hot dog. He lifts the trophy up over his head, opening his mouth as wide as it will go, and tears the metal in half with a horrible screeching sound, shoving the pieces into his mouth, chewing and swallowing. By the time the announcer and the champion recover from their shock enough to move again, the trophy is completely gone, vanished into the stranger's belly. After a day of seemingly impossible feats of feasting, the sight of this strange man consuming a truly impossible meal of metal is just too much for the already anxious crowd to take. The arena erupts into absolute chaos as people spill out of their seats en masse, fleeing the area. The champion, however, does not turn and run. He feels robbed of his victory. Though it may have occurred in an utterly bizarre fashion, he won't stand for this kind of disrespect. He has trained all year for this moment, only to watch his trophy be eaten right in front of him. He marches right up to the stranger and pokes him in the chest, demanding to know who he thinks he is. What gives him the right to crash the hot dog eating contest, interrupt the proceedings, and upstage his victory by chowing down on the trophy? The man doesn't answer him, so the champion continues to berate him, wagging his finger in his face. The stranger's eyes follow the finger, and slowly he opens his mouth. There is a sudden chomp, and the champion screams, holding his hand to his chest, using his shirt to stem the bleeding. He turns to run with the rest of the crowd, but it's too late. The stranger's hand clamps down on his shoulder, holding him in place with a surprising strength. The only thing he sees before his life is snuffed out is the stranger's wide-open mouth, before everything goes dark with another sickening chomp. All the while, the crowd's terror rises to a fever pitch at the horrible sight. They trample each other as they scramble to vacate the area, shoving strangers and loved ones alike out of the way in a bid to escape this mysterious equal-opportunity omnivore with an appetite for far more than just hot dogs. Some manage to escape, running far enough from the arena that they can stop to catch their breaths and glance back at the ones who were not so lucky. Those who tripped and fell in the madness, who had the wind knocked out of them by an elbow to the gut from one of their neighbors, those with weak ankles or who hadn't tied their shoes carefully enough. All of these poor, unfortunate souls are next on the menu for the stranger, who devours them one by one, rarely even stopping to chew. As one surviving woman watching from a distance pulls out her phone to call 911, she can't escape noticing the parallels to the contest itself, the way the stranger eats with a singular focus on consuming as much as possible. There's no pause to enjoy the meal, but there is no sadism or malice in the act either, just the sheer, undeniable drive to keep eating. The woman's call to the police is one of the strangest moments of her life and utterly baffles the local police department. "Ma'am, please calm down," one officer repeats again and again. "What do you mean there's a man eating people?" "I mean exactly what I said," she shouts. "A man showed up at the hot dog contest and started eating people. Please, you have to do something." "I think this is above our pay grade, miss," another officer chimes in. "You think we should call, the first officer trails off. Who? The woman demands, but the line goes dead before she can ask another question. The police are clearly no help, and she isn't about to stick around and see just how big this stranger's appetite is. She tried to save the others, but now she needs to save herself. She runs all the way home without another glance back. Meanwhile, the local police did make that mysterious call, and an SCP Foundation mobile task force is currently en route to the scene. By the time they arrive, the park is a ghost town, with nothing but the blood-stained grass and abandoned arena to suggest that something horrible ever happened here at all. But these aren't some bumbling local police officers who have no idea what to do with a man-eating anomaly. This team has seen enough bizarre sights to fill a lifetime, and another lifetime after that. They spy a trail of sticky red footprints leading away from the arena. At first, they assume that the substance is blood, but a closer examination reveals that it is, in fact, ketchup. They track the savory footprints away from the scene of the day's unsavory events, following them to a nearby warehouse. Judging from the scattered wooden beams, rustling metal, and boarded-up windows, this place has been abandoned for some time. The perfect place for an anomaly to hide away. If they weren't certain, the sound of someone inside biting through sheets of metal is plenty of indication that this is the right place. With no time to waste, they break down the door of the warehouse, weapons drawn and ready.
They follow the sound of the chewing, splitting up to apprehend the subject from all available directions. The shriek of tearing metal echoes through the building, bouncing off the walls and creating a cacophony that is difficult to track. They do their best to follow the sound, but quickly veer off in separate directions in an attempt to cover as much ground as possible. One operative confronts the stranger just as he is reaching for another piece of metal. He watches as the man takes a massive bite out of the steel, a bite that should have shattered his teeth and broken his jaw. Instead, a cartoonish bite mark is taken out of the metal. He approaches the stranger, who, upon locking eyes with him, begins to shake his head, still chewing. The MTF operative ignores this visual cue, approaching the man and attempting to physically restrain him. This, like the confrontation with the champion before, is cut off with a fateful chomp, and the operative screams ringing out through the warehouse, alerting his teammates to his unfortunate fate. The screams suddenly go silent, and another MTF operative stops cold, listening as the sound of chewing draws nearer and nearer. He spins around to face the presence behind him and spots the stranger standing there. The otherwise ordinary man is polishing off the tip of a steel beam, grimacing as he swallows it. The operative lifts his weapon, pointing it at the subject. The operative tells him to stand down and come quietly. The hungry man pleads wide-eyed for the operative to turn and run while he still can. He takes small, reluctant steps toward the operative, muttering that he can't stop. The operative brandishes his weapon again, barking another order for the man to stop. Before he can make another move, the stranger snatches the weapon out of his hand, opens his mouth, and swallows it. He winces as he does, but does not stop until the weapon is completely devoured. All at once, he lets out a loud belch, his knees buckle, and he slumps to the ground. He rubs his stomach, wipes his brow, and sighs heavily. "I'm so sorry about that. I was just so hungry I couldn't help it." The man shakes his head sadly. "I hope you can get a new weapon. And I'm sorry about your friend, too." "You said you couldn't help it. Why'd you stop?" The stranger shrugs, sighs again, and simply says, "Well, because I was full." After a bit of convincing, and a test confirming that the subject's strength and bite force has returned to ordinary human levels, the remaining mobile task force agreed to bring him into Foundation custody unharmed, though restrained. They pile into one of the SCP Foundation's trademark unmarked vans and set off toward the nearest Foundation site. About 1 hour into the trip, the subject begins to lament his growling stomach, asking if they could possibly stop somewhere for a bite to eat. Ordinarily, this is against protocol, but after what happened to their teammate, the task force members aren't taking any chances. They pull into a fast food drive-thru and permit the subject to order whatever he wants. They'll declare it as a business expense later. 5 burgers, 5 fries, 5 tacos, 5 pies, 5 cokes, 10 tater tots, 10 tenders, 5 shakes, 5 pancakes, 5 jalapeno poppers, and 5 baked potatoes later, the task force successfully reached the Foundation site with their newest subject, SCP-913. SCP-913 appears to be an average African-American man around middle age. Though his appearance is completely ordinary, his metabolism is unnaturally fast. He requires the recommended daily caloric intake for an average human being every 2 hours and has an unusually high internal temperature, though the specific number has been redacted from his official file. If he does not meet his calorie requirement for a given 2-hour period, he will enter a trance state in which he is unable to control himself. In this state, he will break down and ingest any solid matter in his line of sight. This includes matter that would ordinarily be indigestible, including wood, plastic, and metal. In this state, his appetite does not distinguish between living and non-living subjects. When he is in this hunger-driven state, he is aware of all his actions, but cannot stop himself, even when he eats dense materials that cause him extreme discomfort. If this state hits while the subject is sleeping, he will be forced awake. In addition to his anomalous appetite, SCP-913 can rend objects at an estimated force of 3,000 newtons and can bite objects with an estimated force of 5,000 newtons when eating them. Whenever he is not in his trance state, he cannot replicate this strength. An examination of SCP-913's liver tissue showed that it is capable of producing new enzymes in response to foreign material, allowing his body to digest matter that should be highly dangerous to consume. These enzymes metabolize the substrate at an efficiency of approximately 98%, detoxifying any drugs or toxins consumed by the subject during the hunger state or otherwise. This includes, but is not limited to, amnestics and anesthetics. When SCP-913 was first discovered, he was wearing a shirt and dress pants, both with the brand name Doctor's Orders sewn onto their tags. SCP-913 has no tattoos aside from one on his right calf, which reads, Mr. Hungry, from Little Misters by Dr. Wondertainment. Just in case you aren't aware, the Little Misters are a line of humanoid anomalies created by the mysterious Dr. Wondertainment Corporation, including the fish-headed Mr. Fish, the candy-coated Ms. Sweetie, and Mr. Life and Mr. Death, who is every bit as existentially upsetting as he sounds. The purpose of these creations is currently unknown, though, like many Dr. Wondertainment products, their existence invites endless speculation. SCP-913 must be contained in a customized humanoid containment cell lined with 1 meter thick carbon steel. 913 is to be provided standard furnishings for his containment cell, coinciding with the usual necessities for a comfortable humanoid dwelling. He may be given pre-recorded entertainment materials, such as concerts, films, and television shows upon request. The cell may be accessed via a reinforced carbon steel door. Once every 2 hours, SCP-913 is provided with 1 nutritional supplement as specified in Document 913-2. I attempted to locate a copy of 913-2 for further details on said nutritional supplement, but access to it appears to be limited to researchers assigned to SCP-913. While the subject is sleeping, nutrition is provided to SCP-913 via a central venous catheter that must be changed once every 3 months. These measures allow SCP-913 to receive the calories that he needs to avoid entering a hunger state, ensuring the safety of everyone on site, as well as his own comfort. Like the rest of the Little Misters, SCP-913 presents a puzzle that may never be solved. I could spend my limited time on this Earth wondering why Dr. Wondertainment would create a being that seems to serve no purpose other than eating as much as possible, lest he unwillingly destroy the environment around him. But I believe that would be a waste of time. Why does Dr. Wondertainment do anything that they do? Why create a woman who can turn men into candy soldiers? Why create an ordinary man with a fish head, a tiny top hat, and a Boston accent? The personal motivations of Dr. Wondertainment, whether they are an individual or a massive conglomerate, are as inscrutable to me as the meaning of life itself, or the reasons why a person would want to eat more than 2 hot dogs in one sitting.
It started with a woman. We'll call her Valerie. It doesn't matter whether or not that it's her real name, since her real name is lost, even to herself. Valerie was a young woman, but what many would describe as a very old soul. She'd been to strange places, seen awful things, and gotten in touch with some dangerous people. Like a lot of people with hard lives, Valerie tried to find relief wherever she could, partying, gambling, buying herself expensive things. After all, she was here for a good time, not a long time, and she wanted to eke out any pleasure she could while she was still able. That's how she ended up in the high rollers section of a very exclusive private club in New York City. They had the finest drinks, the most attentive waitstaff, and the strangest entertainment. But that's the kind of exceptional service you can expect from a club run by one of the most powerful and influential clandestine enterprises in the world, Marshall, Carter & Dark Limited. Valerie had no idea who the club's owner was, though. She had come here with a wealthy friend. Well, calling them a friend might be pushing it. She was here with someone she had met earlier that night. But now, as she sipped her drink and played another hand of blackjack, she realized that he was nowhere to be seen. Oh well, she didn't have anybody to please but herself, and the clubs of Marshall, Carter, and Dark can provide plenty of pleasure, as long as you can pay. Valerie's problem was that she didn't have the money to keep living large off of their largesse, and she was about to get a rude awakening as to just how much these mysterious businessmen value their bottom line. If she took a second to think about it, she may have noticed she was out of place among the rest of the clientele. Wealthy businessmen and shady moguls in fine suits. What was a girl like her doing in a place like this? Unless, of course, she was here to fulfill another purpose entirely. Eventually, a bill was presented to Valerie. "Oh, this isn't for me," she told the waiter. "My friend is taking care of everything." When she went to motion towards the wealthy man who had brought her here, she realized that he was nowhere to be seen. "I'm afraid the gentleman I believe you're referring to left some time ago," the waiter told her. Valerie was disappointed, but this kind of thing had happened to her before. She reached for her purse. It looked like she'd be paying for herself that night. "All right, how much do I owe you?" she said as she grabbed a handful of chips from her stack. "I'm afraid you might be a little confused," the waiter told her, eyeing what at most could be a couple $100 in casino chips. "Are you not aware of what you're drinking?" Valerie glanced at the bottle of champagne sitting next to her, and then at the other 2 identical empty bottles sitting next to it. "It's the champagne he ordered," Valerie answered. "Yes," said the waiter, "but that isn't just any champagne." Valerie's eyes began to grow wide as he went on. "Those are from a very rare and very expensive vintage." "How rare?" Valerie nervously asked. Extremely rare, the waiter told her. Each bottle you were drinking cost... It felt like the room suddenly filled with rushing water. The edges of her vision dimmed as a roar filled her ears as she heard the last thing the waiter said. Each bottle she had drank cost $20,000. When Valerie regained her senses, she was being escorted by a group of tall gentlemen in dark business suits into a soundproof back room, where they explained the severity of her situation. As the fear continued to set in, she started to beg. She said that if they just gave her a little more time, she could earn back the money she owed them. The solemn-faced representative explained to her that Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited doesn't operate like that. However, there would be other ways that she could pay back her debt to them, but it would be their way. They gave a brief explanation that providing luxury private clubs to an esteemed clientele was only one part of their enterprise. The other side of their business was even more exclusive. An auction house where truly unique products are sold to the highest bidders. And come to think of it, there was a hole in the market that seemed to be just Valerie's size. All they asked for was for her to spend a period of time in their service, and when the debt was repaid, her life would be hers once more. And there was more to it as well. Although she would have to work for them, time would not actually pass for her during her service. She'd get to keep her youth. It would be as if she'd never worked for them at all, a blink of an eye, and she'd be right back where she was. Valerie took just a moment to consider it. She wasn't sure she believed what these men were telling her, but she'd heard and seen some very strange things in her life. Was this really so hard to believe? And after all, what choice did she have? She didn't have $60,000. So she agreed to repay her debt to Marshall, Carter, and Dark, and do whatever that entailed. The representatives assured her that all she'd need to do is lay back and relax. They'd take care of the rest. Valerie didn't remember much after that moment, but she awoke in the dark. She couldn't move any part of her body other than her eyes. The next time she saw the light, she remembered being up on stage, looking down at a crowd of people wielding auction paddles, while an animated auctioneer reeled off the many advantages of some product she couldn't see. Certain words and phrases stuck out. Fully articulated and posable, warm to the touch, not a blemish on her, never talks back, she'll always look you right in the eye. Eventually, someone won, and she was placed back in the darkness. Years went by, being taken in and out of the dark by strangers, wearing different clothes and being referred to by different names, moving only when she was permitted. Little by little, she forgot the person that she once was. One day ran into the next. It all became a blur of darkness, punctuated by brief flashes of light. Years turned into decades. She never said a word. She forgot what it even felt like to be able to speak. But then one day, out of the darkness, appeared a pair of strangers in black tactical gear who looked at her with an expression somewhere in between pity and disgust. From that moment on, she finally found a new name to replace that empty void. Now, she was SCP-446. The files on SCP-446 are as mysterious as they are deeply disconcerting, and we can only speculate as to the exact process that led to the creation of SCP-446, since the duplicitous salesmen at Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited don't seem eager to share their secrets with anyone outside of their organization. But what SCP Foundation researchers have learned from solid empirical observation is that SCP-446 is a humanoid mannequin 1.75 meters tall and weighing 52.16 kilograms. She is, or perhaps was, a pale-skinned Caucasian woman who appears to be in her early 20s. She has brown hair that measures 17.78 centimeters at its longest point, brilliant, bright blue eyes, and the distinctive Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited logo tattooed on her lower back. In many ways, she has all the hallmarks of a living human being. She's superficially anatomically correct, with realistic skin tone and texture, eye coloration and sclera clarity, and researchers who've dealt with her directly claim that she has the warmth of a real human being. Despite seeming to be alive, though, SCP-446 doesn't respond to verbal communication, has no pulse or heartbeat, and she doesn't even appear to breathe. Whether SCP-446 can truly be considered alive is still an open question among Foundation researchers. SCP-446 is stored in the same hinged metal box she was found in, which is plain save for a series of clothing measurements for those wishing to purchase their own custom accessories. When Foundation field agents first discovered her, they attempted to sit her up. However, what they found was that she responded to their touch, sitting up on her own. All it took to get her to lay back down was a gentle push on her shoulders from the front. Through further study, It was discovered that selective touch cues can induce different types of movement in SCP-446. She could be induced to stand up on her own, and through gentle pressure applied to the top of the head, she could be induced to sit or lay back down on her own. You may have also noticed the somewhat uncanny quality of SCP-446's eyes. Please don't be alarmed. It isn't anything out of the ordinary. Her eyes will follow the nearest person to her around the room, and she'll try to make eye contact if possible. Don't let it bother you. Everyone gets used to it eventually. Her limbs can also be posed and manipulated as required, even into positions requiring balance, like standing on one leg. However, if pushed over, she will immediately lose balance and fall. It seems almost as though her actions are defined as much by the toucher's intent as the touch itself. Essentially out of any more ways to learn about SCP-446, an in-depth medical examination was authorized. Given the humanoid nature of 446, the doctor conducting the examination decided to proceed in a manner similar to the kinds of autopsies given to non-anomalous human corpses. The doctor noted being disturbed by the fact that 446's eyes kept following them, even as they prepared the tools for the autopsy. They also remarked on the almost freakish clearness of the subject's skin. There wasn't a single detectable mark or blemish, almost like a porcelain doll. There was no rigor or livor mortis, nor any signs of damage or injury to the body. Examination of the mouth revealed an obstruction at the top of the throat, a metal plate fixed to the back of her mouth, bonded to the flesh on all sides. The plate shifts slightly when touched, but couldn't be removed. Similar plates had been installed in the ear canals, nostrils, and all other body orifices, as if to ensure that nothing can enter or exit 446's body. The doctor then moved on to the internal examination of SCP-446, beginning with a number of X-rays. These revealed several irregularly shaped masses inside 446's body, covering major organs such as the heart, brain, kidneys, and liver. Dissection revealed these masses to be boxes of various shapes and sizes, constructed from the same metal that comprises the obstructive plates. These boxes are connected to the corresponding organs through a series of wires and tubes. The doctor notes that neither their scalpel nor their wire saw could cause any meaningful damage to the boxes, and that it's possible the boxes not only keep the body preserved, but also allow for its limited set of movements. Certain barriers presented themselves during the dissection process, both physical and psychological. SCP-446 exhibited an extraordinary healing factor, fully repairing her own skin minutes after having her chest fully opened in a Y incision. This made sustained internal observation difficult, and the doctor declined to perform any more extensive mutilations for fear that the damage would be irreparable. This limited the progress that could be made in the procedures overall. However, it wasn't the worst thing to occur during the dissection. The doctor noted that SCP-446 stared at them the entire time while they were making incisions into the body, making them extremely uncomfortable. And during the several-minute healing process of the Y incision in her chest, SCP-446's mouth moved, as if speaking silently the entire time. The doctor left a note that this may suggest a level of sapience in 446, though nothing could be proved conclusively on that front. The file for SCP-446 is a relatively sparse one, given the minimal containment requirements of the anomaly. Between studies, she is simply kept in her box. There has, however, been one notable incident involving SCP-446, documented by Foundation researcher Dr. Sunderland back in 2010. The event, labeled Incident 446-1, took place in Storage Room 6. In the interest of preserving the anomaly's modesty, she was dressed in a standard D-Class uniform before being placed back into her box for the night. A guard reported a strange thumping noise later that evening and investigated himself and found it was coming from the inside of SCP-446's box. Dr. Sunderland was called in at this point and oversaw the opening of the box. It turned out that SCP-446 was repeatedly attempting to rise to a sitting pose inside the box and was banging her head against the lid. Finally freed, SCP-446 rose to her feet of her own volition for the first time since the start of her containment. She assumed a strange pose, her head bowed and her wrists touching above her head, as though her hands were bound at the wrists, or she was desperately praying or begging. Her facial expression also shifted for the first time, taking on a look of sadness and fear. Dr. Sunderland was able to make SCP-446 return to a more neutral standing position, but nothing could make her permanently assume the laying position again until the D-Class uniform was once again removed. There is still not a confirmed explanation as to why exactly this happened, but the answers may be too horrible to even consider. For this particular anomaly, which has been given the Safe Class designation, perhaps the kindest thing to do is leave her in the box. That's at least a more humane fate than whatever Marshall, Carter, and Dark had planned. You've seen his face before, probably during a particularly distressing bout of sleep paralysis. His appearance can vary a bit from manifestation to manifestation, but a few traits are always present. He resembles an elderly man. His touch corrodes everything in his path. His presence creates a disgusting, black, mucus-like substance thought to be a method of pre-digestion of his prey. And he is rotting. No matter his appearance, he is always in some stage of decomposition. Gray skin sloughing away from yellowed bone, eyes milky and flat, but brimming with malice, wide, toothless mouth stretched into a wicked grin. The entity is incredibly difficult to contain. Its corrosive properties and ability to vanish into solid matter and disappear into its pocket dimension layer make it a threat as unpredictable as it is dangerous. The smell of decay and the presence of visible corrosion on any surfaces nearby may be the only warning a person gets before the old man grabs them in his decomposing arms, dragging them off to a painful, terrifying demise. We know where the being disappears to and have learned a great deal about how he operates. But where did he come from? It is the year 2000. Dr. Robert Scranton and his wife, Dr. Anna Lang, are the head researchers at SCP Foundation Site 120. Over the course of their happy relationship, the two have been working on an experimental research project, an early prototype reality-anchor device called the Lang-Scranton Stabilizer. After a lot of late nights at the office, working and reworking the theory, it is, at long last, ready for testing. Dr. Scranton is standing in Reality Lab A as Dr. Lang observes from a nearby room. He follows the same routine he has followed each time they tested the LSS, walking down a line of buttons and levers, pressing and flipping each into place. The little red blinking light signifies that the microphone is recording his every comment and observation. Suddenly, the routine is broken by a low rumbling sound from deep, deep within the earth. The ground beneath him begins to shake, and Dr. Scranton stumbles, losing his balance as the once solid floor begins to roil and quake as the seismic shift rolls through the site. He hears the unmistakable grind and splintering of metal and plastic as the LSS-2 begins to shake, components sliding out of place and breaking off. Nearby, Dr. Lang's monitor goes dark as the security feed is cut short by the earthquake's damage. "Robert!" she screams, making a break for the door and rushing to Reality Lab A, terrified that she will find her husband's body lying on the floor. When she and the guards reach the room, however, they find nothing. Well, not nothing entirely. The room is a wreck, bits of machinery strewn across the floor, the smell of burning plastic in the air. But the Lang-Scranton Scrambler's control panel and Dr. Robert Scranton are nowhere to be found. Dr. Lang falls to her knees in the suddenly empty room, pounding at the floor in despair. "Where did he go?" she demands, but of course, no one knows the answer. No one wants to say what they're thinking. Wherever he is, Dr. Scranton is probably dead. Probably long, long gone, and he is never coming back. But no one says it, not out loud. They just think it, and keep thinking it, for the next 5 years, 11 months, and 21 days. The time passes, and most everyone forgets about Dr. Robert Scranton. Everyone except for Dr. Anna Lang. She never gives up hope, never lets go of the possibility that somewhere, in another world, another time, on another planet, her love is still alive. One day she wakes up and it's December 23rd, 2005. A day like any other, save for its uncomfortable proximity to the holidays she struggles to celebrate nowadays. But then, in the middle of the day, something impossible happens. The LSS control panel reappears in Reality Lab A. It isn't how anyone last saw it, though. It's coated in some sort of unidentified organic matter, and it reeks of blood, vomit, and decay. As her colleagues try to shield her from the sight, try to warn her away, Dr. Anna Lang wades into the area, desperate for a glimpse at any sign of her husband's fate. As she makes her way into the containment field, she is unable to contain her horror. "Oh God, what the hell? What is all this? This is the... Oh God, Robert? Is this you? Oh God, please, no, don't let it be you, Robert, I thought, how can this thing be?" Her colleagues try to stop her, but she touches the Lang-Scranton stabilizer interface, and it fires to life. It still works. Somehow it still works. She racks her brain for what to do next, before saying, "Access audio log, playback starting from January 2nd, 2000. The machine prompts her to verbally state her password, and her voice shakes as she replies, "Password is Anna Bobana." Request acknowledged. Processing. The machine replies. I'm sorry. There are no audio logs for January 2nd, 2000. Dr. Scranton accessed log on January 13th, 2000 via voice recognition at time. Anna slams her hands down on the machine with a cry. Play back now! Damn it, play it back! A researcher warns her not to touch any of the material with her bare hands, but she doesn't hear him. She's too busy calling out to Robert, hoping that somehow, somewhere, he can hear her. There's so much blood here, there's so much... Honey, are you okay? Where did you go? Oh God, oh God, oh God. Something small and metallic clatters to the floor, lost in the sludge. She retrieves it, wipes it off on her lab coat, and holds it to the light. She would recognize it anywhere. She slipped it onto her true love's finger on the happiest day of her life. It's Robert's wedding ring. Her knees buckle at the realization. She collapses to the ground, and her head cracks against the floor. One of her colleagues snaps into action. Report, this is Dr. Matthew Skinner reporting from Site 120 Reality Lab A. I need medical attention here immediately. Once Dr. Lang recovers from her fall, she demands access to the rematerialized control panel. She's going to go through the audio logs one by one and find out exactly what happened to her husband, even if the truth is as ugly as she fears. The machine whirs to life, and her lost love's voice emanates from the speakers.
Name, Robert Scranton. Age, 39. Birthday, September 19th, 1961. Favorite color, blue. Favorite song, Living on a Prayer. Wife, Anna. She has green eyes.
I love her very much. He repeated these simple truths to himself for days, before he even realized that the control panel was picking up his voice. My name is Robert Scranton. Yeah, my name is Robert Scranton, former researcher at Foundation Site 120. It has been... I don't know, actually. I can't remember. I estimate it's been 10 days, but I can't... Oh, God. Can anyone hear me? I don't know what's happened. I don't know where I am, and please, is anyone there? Hello? Anyone? Anyone? He began keeping track of how much time passed as best he could. 2 weeks, 3 days, 7 hours, and 58 minutes. Oh, Jesus. Back at the Foundation, with at least a tenuous knowledge of where Dr. Scranton could be, personnel try their best to stage some kind of rescue effort. A mobile task force team is ordered to attempt to replicate the experiment with a hastily assembled Lang-Scranton stabilizer copy. The result is an explosion that kills 3 of them. Senior researchers also approach SCP-343, a powerful reality warper known to some as God, hoping to get some insight from him about where Dr. Scranton could be found. His response is, "He's beyond any of us now. I'm truly, dreadfully sorry." Anna starts having nightmares. She twists and turns in bed, haunted by visions of her beloved Robert consumed by darkness. A strange specter starts to appear in her dreams, a man with a horrible, rotted face. She turns to her bedside table in the night, numbers blurry on the screen of her alarm clock. The photograph of herself and Robert that she keeps there. Something is wrong with him, wrong with his face. Is it that same awful, rotted man? She screams and closes her eyes. When she opens them, the photo is normal again. She weeps into her pillow. It can't keep going on like this. This place, it's some sort of reality gap, I think. If I don't concentrate on it, it's fine, but I feel this tingling all over my face. I'm not sure why.
2 months, 15 days, 4 hours.
Anna begins to accept the horrible truth. She may not see Robert ever again, and holding on to the foolish fantasy that she will is starting to kill her. She repeats it to herself like a mantra at work. Robert Scranton is dead. Robert Scranton is dead. Robert Scranton is dead. One day, a coworker notices her muttering and strikes up a conversation. It's been years since Robert disappeared. What's the harm in talking to someone again? She even finds herself smiling and laughing at his jokes, but when he asks if she'd like to go for coffee, she gets a flash of Robert screaming in the darkness, of that terrible, rotted face, grinning. She runs to the bathroom to throw up and weep. The tingling in my face has worsened. I wish I could sleep here, but All this damn gunfire overhead. Can't take it anymore. Can't take it. Trench foot. Shell shock. Hell would be a reprieve in a place like this. And all the men, all the poor souls who look up to me, call me Corporal. What a jerk. To think I have any more idea of what's going on here.
Anna can hear it in his voice. He's getting worn down. As Anna feels her emotions start to dull and fade, she begins accepting more dangerous assignments from her superiors, perhaps hoping just to feel something again. She works on the SCP-682 case, trying to devise more futile termination methods. She spends time with SCP-939, the abominations known as With Many Voices, until they start to imitate Robert's voice, and she knows that she can't do this anymore. She works with SCP-280, Eyes in the Dark, feeling no fear whatsoever as it floats towards her. The worst thing that could possibly happen to her has happened already. Now, she's just waiting, killing time. She has no idea of the further horrors to come.
Lately, I've been hearing whispers in the dark. I think the rats are talking to me. Oh, funny. My troops must think me mad. What does it matter? This is a mad place, a mad time. A mad man is perhaps best suited to a time like this.
So many went over the top yesterday, only to be cut down by machine gun fire. Isn't it odd that I laughed? It was so funny.
I think perhaps this mental malady is connected to a physical one. Nosebleeds and vomiting spells. A strange, black liquid. Faintly acidic to the touch. But so delicious. So fun. My troops tell me I look unwell. Like anything about this is well. Maybe I'll sneak into one of their bedsits tonight and teach them to lighten up a bit. None of them smile anymore. Me, I'm always smiling. I'll teach those little cowards to smile too.
But as she listens to more of the logs, she's forced to reckon with the fact it really isn't him anymore. Not as she'd ever known him. He'd become something else.
All the others are dead. All my good, hard work, making them dead. I followed them down the length of the trench. Their silly little bullets didn't hurt me. Oh no. Oh no. The look on their faces. All the screaming as they saw me. How thrilling to savor their fear as I approached. All those screams. What are you, you horrible old man? I showed them what I am. I can walk through walls now, you know. Have all the fun I want. Yes. Nothing can hurt me anymore. And I can hurt everyone. And when the war is over, I'll go home. Go home to my sweetheart. I know she's waiting for me. I can't wait to see her, to touch her beautiful face. My lovely
Anna.
Hearing him like this, so broken, so utterly transformed, it's too much for her to bear. But the work always needs her, and she returns to it day after day. One night, she sits up late, making her way through a stack of paperwork, when she hears it. A curious sound. Drip, drip, drip. Something thick dripping steadily onto the floor behind her. The smell of rot fills her nostrils, making her gag. She turns and comes face to face with SCP-106, dripping its slimy black mucus onto the floor, bringing decay to everything it touches. It reaches out toward her, grasping at her arm. She breaks free, but not before its touch melts away the fibers of her lab coat, threatening to seep through the fabric to her skin. All the while, it's staring straight at her, like it knows her. Anna runs out of the lab as fast as she can, shouting for help. A guard tries to come to her assistance, firing his weapon at the old man, but the bullets don't leave a dent, don't even slow him down. The old man grabs the weapon from the guard's hands, letting the metal rust, warp, and melt in his grasp.
Then he turns his corrosive touch on the guard's face. Anna screams in horror at the sight, but she can do nothing to help him. All that she can do is keep running and hope that the monster doesn't catch her. She runs as fast as her legs can carry her, but she isn't as young as she once was, and years of sitting at a desk have made her muscles stiff and weak. Her foot hits the ground at just the wrong angle, and she stumbles, falling to the ground. She scrambles back to her feet, but when she looks up, something is horribly wrong. Her surroundings have changed. It looks like the Foundation site, but it's not quite the same. It's as if someone tried to recreate the facility from memory and couldn't retain all of the details. Then she hears it again. The drip, drip, drip. He's here. She spins around, and there it is. That awful face, so close to her own. She takes a trembling step back when suddenly, the monster speaks. It's him. She knows it, as surely as she knows that she is about to die. The monster that once was Robert Scranton reaches out and caresses Anna's cheek with his wrinkled hand. She screams as the skin begins to droop, and he seals her lips with a kiss that makes her insides drip like melting wax. The two become one once again. The year is 1630, and the city of London is bustling with new life. The streets are filled with people going about their daily lives, cramming into housing and businesses, and struggling to accommodate the rapidly increasing population, which has more than doubled in the previous 50 years. Among the new citizens of London is a dark figure who keeps to himself, a man in long black robes and a beaked mask, dressed like the plague doctors of the Black Death centuries before. The figure that will one day be known as SCP-049 has come to London town to embark on the next chapter of his life in his ongoing quest to solve the ills plaguing humanity. Though one might expect his appearance to make him stand out, most of the citizens surging through the city streets have far more important things on their minds than what the man in the mask might be up to. So he has managed to carve out a little sanctuary, an empty warehouse where he rests and works. When curiosity gets the better of him, he slinks down alleyways, avoiding crowds and listening for any whispered secrets he can catch from the shadows. It is on one of these outings that he hears tell of Henry Percy, also known as the Wizard Earl, a mysterious researcher of science and the occult, held in Martin Tower in the Tower of London. A man of wisdom and curiosity, pushing the boundaries of scientific study. That is just the sort of man that the Doctor has been hoping to meet and learn from here in this great city. The Plague Doctor swiftly abandons his sanctuary and makes his way to the Tower of London, where he makes swift work of the guards that would bar him from entry. He does not enjoy harming innocents, but alas, some sacrifices must be made in the pursuit of greater knowledge and understanding. Leaving a trail of bodies in his wake, the Plague Doctor makes his way into Martin Tower.
Excuse me, sir. I apologize for the intrusion, but as a fellow academic, I wondered if I might speak with you.
But as he enters the chamber, the Doctor finds that his polite introduction was wasted on an empty room. Wherever this Wizard Earl might be, he is not in his designated quarters. Fearing the worst, the Doctor searches for signs of a struggle, for bloodstains on the floor or overturned furniture, but everything appears to be in its rightful place. Where, then, could Henry Percy have gone? The Plague Doctor explores every inch of the tower, searching for any clues that might point him in the direction of the missing man. He inspects every item on every surface, pulls every book from every shelf, but as he pulls one particular book from its spot, the bookshelf appears to pop loose from the wall like a door opening. Indeed, it is a door, revealing a dark, winding stairway just beyond its secret opening.
Ah, so this is where you have disappeared to.
Truly, this Earl must be a clever man, a good ally to have in the battle against the pestilence. He follows the stairs down, down, down into a small room in the bowels of the tower. It is a sparse, barren room, with only a stack of journals and a large iron door. The Doctor spends hours searching for a lock or other mechanism to open the door, before turning to the journals left behind by the tower's occupant. There, he discovers the instructions for unlocking the iron gateway, directions he recognizes from his time studying alchemy. Fortunately, he has all of the necessary materials tucked away in his trusty doctor's bag, and he is able to effectively perform the esoteric procedure. As he dusts off his gloved hands, content with a job well done, he hears the click of a bolt unlatching, and the second secret door he has discovered today swings open to welcome him in. Ever the adventurous spirit, the Doctor picks up his bag and crosses the threshold into whatever awaits him on the other side. As the iron door shuts behind him, the doctor gazes up into a yellow sky dotted with an infinite number of black stars. A breeze blows the scent of dried flowers, mold, and the dusty pages of century-old books into his nostrils. He hears the sound of waves lapping at a shore and turns to take in the sight of a thick black sea washing up onto a stark white shore. The world around him is an array of black, white, yellow, and red, the yellow sky reflecting in the inky waves, the glittering black stars dancing above garish red buildings, white staircases, yellow doors, and black windows made from something like stained glass. This strange new place is not empty either. All around him, there are as many people bustling through the streets as there are back in London, though their attire is quite different. These people dress in a way that feels familiar, that reminds the plague doctor of the ornate clothing he once saw at the Carnival of Venice. The people cover their faces too, commedia dell'arte masks hiding their features and giving them a mysterious appearance. For the first time since the days of the Black Plague, the doctor is keenly aware of the fact that he does not stand out in this place. In fact, he blends right in. Now to search for Henry Percy, or anyone else who can offer the doctor some helpful insight. Uncertain of where exactly to start, the doctor decides to simply strike up a conversation with a stranger. A woman walks by in an elaborate red gown, her feathery white mask almost resembling a swan.
"Excuse me, madame,"
the doctor calls to her, stepping into her path.
"No time to talk, I'm already quite late."
She brushes past him, and the doctor braces for the ill effect of physical contact between the two to take hold. However, she continues on her merry way, seemingly unaffected by his normally deadly touch. He watches her go, stunned into silence for a moment. The citizens of this strange new place. It is safe for him to touch them. Something else catches his eye about the woman too. Up close, it seemed to him that her mask was not a costume piece, but in fact, a part of her face, much like his mask was a part of his own.
"How curious,"
he remarks aloud to himself. Henry Percy can wait. This is a far more compelling matter.
"I must uncover more about this land."
And so the plague doctor takes a long stroll through the unusual city, noticing as he goes that the geometry and gravity of this place do not play by the rules he recognizes. Buildings slant at odd angles, alleyways and corridors appear and disappear, as the layout of the city seems to shift at random with each glance. The people themselves are just as bizarre as the place they occupy, behaving either uniquely rudely or entirely too familiar. Pushing past the doctor with a glare or tugging at his robes insistently, attempting to pull him down an alleyway or into a rapturous bout of sudden fevered dancing in a town square. He refuses these advances as politely as possible and carries on his way. An elegantly dressed couple gives him a friendly wave as they walk by him, not an unusual occurrence. What is unusual is where they are waving from, looking down on him from an upside-down staircase that they traverse with no trouble. Some other gravity source holding them in this reversed position as they disappear into a dizzyingly constructed building.
Fascinating.
The doctor shakes his head in awe. Then it occurs to him. He should be taking notes on all of this. He opens his bag and digs around for his leather-bound notebook, but can't seem to find it. He stops on the street and begins dumping out the contents of his pack onto the stone walkway. Jars of specimens, salves, syringes, and surgical tools all tumble out, but no notebook. It must have fallen out of his bag somewhere on his journey. Or worse, it could have been stolen by one of these flamboyantly dressed strangers. No, he mustn't allow his mind to jump to the worst possible explanation. Most likely he simply dropped it somewhere, and he only needs to retrace his steps to find it. He begins to walk back the way he came, as best he can find it in city streets that seem to warp and change with every moment like the landscape of a dream. He approaches dozens of people, but each stranger he speaks to brushes him aside, rushing off to their far more important business. They seem to look at him with disdain, like something foul stuck to the bottom of their fine shoes. It is discouraging, and it seems as if the notebook may very well be lost forever. But then, hope. Amidst a sea of people hurrying to their next destination, the doctor spots a man in a red cloak standing notably still, leaning against a nearby wall. The figure looks up at him, eyes shining behind a red mask in the shape of a happy, smiling face, reminiscent of the figure of Il Capitano from commedia dell'arte performances the doctor dimly recalls. He sheepishly approaches the grand figure in the cloak and red mask, explaining that he is an outsider to this place. When the red-masked man speaks, he speaks in a warm voice, but with a distinct air of authority.
"Welcome to Alagada, sir, for that is the name of this kingdom. You are fortunate, very fortunate indeed, for I am the Red Lord of Alagada, wearer of the mirthful mask, a chief advisor to the king.
Being a man with medieval origins, the Plague Doctor bows deferentially the second he hears that he's in the presence of a lord. With his knees on the ancient cobblestones below, he begs the Red Lord for assistance in finding his precious notebook, the bearer of all his research and valuable scientific secret. The Red Lord pushes himself away from the wall, standing at an impressive height, seemingly suddenly far larger than he had at first glance. His face seems to strike a sympathetic tone, as sympathetic as one can be while wearing a mask. With a grandiose hand gesture and a dramatic stride, he asks the Doctor to follow him and begins strutting off down the alleyway. The Doctor has come across a person with good manners in this confounding place. He follows close behind the Red Lord as the two traverse the unstable landscape, following a yellow cobblestone street to a winding black staircase that curls around and around in a seemingly eternal spiral before tilting dizzyingly on its side. The Doctor hesitates, afraid he will lose his footing, but much to his surprise, the laws of gravity seem to shift along with the angle of the stairs. It feels as if he is still walking along the same even plane as before, though he can see the sights below now jutting out of view at a disconcerting right angle that makes his vision swim and his stomach turn. So he turns his gaze onto his companion's back, matching the Lord's every confident step. He wonders idly where the man is taking him, but decides to hold off on additional questions until they have reached their destination. The Red Lord comes to a stop at the top of a tall, thin tower. He stands before an unusually shiny black door that curls down at the edges, like the entryway itself is frowning. He sweeps his arm in the direction of the door and beckons the Plague Doctor to follow him inside. Before the Plague Doctor can even mention that the door has no handle or knocker, it simply opens of its own accord, as if by magic. He shakes his head. The Red Lord has already vanished inside, and he quickly follows him. The color palette of Alagada is already quite limited, but this room is stripped of the scant bits of bright pigment found outside. Not a scrap of red or yellow can be seen here, save for the suddenly garish garb of the Red Lord himself. The chamber is decorated in black and white, shimmering black velvet and cold, cruel white marble or something like marble, as this material has an eerie, icy sheen that almost hurts to look at. In a large black chair that again curls down at the edges in a melancholy fashion, there sits another masked man. He is clad in black robes, and his pale white face bears the face of tragedy, open mouth curved into a permanent frown of anguish. The Red Lord gestures to the figure in the chair, who does not speak, and introduces him as the mighty Black Lord of Alagada. The Plague Doctor can see the Black Lord's eyes following him from within the holes of the mask. A mask that members of the SCP Foundation would later refer to as SCP-035. The Doctor asks whether the Black Lord can help him find his book, puzzled at this whole situation. The Red Lord throws his head back and begins to laugh, a warm and genuine sound that nonetheless sends a shiver down the Doctor's spine. The Red Lord claps a hand on the Doctor's shoulder, giving it a squeeze that feels encouraging and threatening all at once, explaining that he'd been brought here under false pretenses. The Lord's already had the book. The Black Lord just needs a favor before he can have it back.
Thank you for accepting my invitation.
The Black Lord speaks, his voice hissing out from the scowling mouth of his mask. The Plague Doctor protests, demanding his book, furious at the deception.
Oh, you'll get them back,
The Red Lord laughs again.
The Black Lord will return them if you prove yourself worthy of their ownership. I bid you farewell, Doctor. May your stay in Alagada be pleasant.
The Red Lord sweeps out of the room, leaving the Doctor alone with the Black Lord. Silence hangs heavy between the two, before the Doctor asks the Black Lord why he'd even want a physician from another world to attend to him. The Black Lord wheezes and spits up black slime that corrodes the ground beneath him. The Doctor shakes his head.
I am no miracle worker, only a simple doctor. I struggle to treat the ailments of my own world. I do not wish to disappoint you, but I have failed again and again to cure the pestilence that plagues my home. I do not know if I would have the capacity to cure you.
The Black Lord's frown seems to deepen.
I am very sorry to hear that. Perhaps I should keep your notes for myself then, and give them to an Alagadan physician for research.
The Doctor's composure breaks. He stomps about the chamber, flinging open every door he can find, searching desperately for the work he'd spent his extremely long life painstakingly compiling, the work that represented his sole efforts in the medical field. He stops at a padlocked door on the far side of the room, grabbing hold of its lock. The Black Lord suddenly cries for him to stop, but it is too late. The Plague Doctor has wrenched the lock free from the door. As soon as the Doctor lets the lock clatter to the ground, there is a horrid skittering sound, like the legs of a massive metal spider crawling along a wall. Click, click, click. And then, all at once, the formerly padlocked door is thrown open with such force it nearly rips from its hinges. A creature crawls through the opening, a monster with the body of a shiny yellow spider, a smooth white humanoid torso, 2 long clawed arms, and a round, featureless orb of a face. It lashes out blindly, raking its claws at the Black Lord where he sits on his chair. Then, before the Plague Doctor can even try to apprehend it, the monster rips through the main door of the chamber, climbing out and over the edge of the tower, and down to the city below. The Black Lord shouts for the Plague Doctor to help him.
What about the monster? What will become of it?
The Plague Doctor's mind races, trying to wrap around what he just witnessed. But the Black Lord has no interest in the monster. The city guards will take care of that. He needs help with his own injuries. The Lord groans in pain, a thick black substance leaking from his wounds and spreading across the once pristine white floor. The Black Lord implores the Plague Doctor to treat him. The Plague Doctor remembers his duty to all that suffer from illness and injury, an oath he once took a long, long time ago, and he opens his doctor's bag, ready to get to work. He has no grasp of Allagadon physiology, no idea where to begin in terms of performing any procedure on the Black Lord, but he cannot stand idly by and watch this man suffer. He begins pulling instruments from his bag, vials of phosphorescent elixirs and foul-smelling tinctures, and begins to improvise. He cleans the wounds with gauze dipped in one of his many tinctures, then begins treating them. The Black Lord's shallow breathing slows to deeper, calmer breaths as the medicine begins to do its job, and these positive results spur the doctor to work faster. He seals up each of the wounds, then slathers them all in a glowing green salve to prevent infection, if infection even exists in this world. When the work is finished, the Black Lord sits up, seemingly to be completely recovered, except for the visible stitches and the tearing of his robes.
Thank you, Doctor. I stole from you, and yet you helped me anyway. Allow me to return this to you, along with my sincerest gratitude.
He reaches into the depths of his robes and produces the doctor's leather-bound notebook.
Take it.
The doctor snatches the notebook from the Black Lord's grip and returns it to its rightful place inside of his bag.
Villain,
he mutters to himself as he does.
Our ways may seem strange to you,
the Black Lord says.
But these are troubled times in Allagadon. All is not well in the court of the Hanged King. There is deception and betrayal everywhere.
All kingdoms encounter periods of strife,
the Plague Doctor remarks.
If you will excuse me, now that I have treated you, I will be on my way back to my own land. I do not wish to stay here any longer.
Of course.
The Black Lord waves him toward the door. As the doctor prepares to leave, however, the Black Lord speaks again.
Are you quite sure that is your land, Doctor? You look quite like the child of a woman I once knew, long ago, who made the mistake of defying the king. She had the face of a crow, as you do. A mask that was not a mask.
Excuse me?
The Plague Doctor does not understand.
Were you born in your world? Were you a child there? Do you remember it that way?
The Black Lord asks. The doctor thinks for a long moment. He cannot recall ever being anything other than what he is now, a doctor with a singular purpose.
I do not know. Perhaps, dear Doctor, this is not your first time in the land of Allagadon, and I imagine that, with time, you shall walk its twisted alleys once again. Consider that on your journey back to the place you call home.
The Black Lord laughs, a low, hollow sound.
Farewell.
Eager to be rid of this place with its lies, tricks, and monsters of many shapes, the Plague Doctor takes his leave. This journey he hoped would provide some answers, but instead, all he found were more questions than he ever could have anticipated. Check out the DrBob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of DrBob, like SCP-3640, Escape from the House of Mickey Mouse.